Chapter 135. When they finally left the hotel and sat in the car, Jinwan felt both her body and mind relaxed. You didn't rest well last night and were drenched in the rain. Go back and have a good sleep. Mo Jingshin's hand caressed Jinwan's head. Are we heading back to the Yu Garden? Hearing the words Yu Garden, Jinwan's expression clearly changed. Without needing her to say anything, Mo Jingshin could see the flash of hesitation in her eyes. Don't worry. In order to restrict my freedom, he used the method of kidnapping you to threaten me. The helpers in the Yu Garden were all sent away by him. No one was harmed. The man's voice was mild and quiet, but it caused Jinwan's heavy heart to finally fall to the ground. Thankfully, nothing happened to Andy Chen and the rest. The security in the Yu Garden is so perfect. If Andy Chen hadn't opened the door, those people wouldn't have had the chance to sneak in, right? Jinwan asked. Mo Jingshin glanced at her, holding her small hand. Forget it. Come back to the company with me. Otherwise, you won't be able to sleep well after you return. That won't happen. I'm just wondering how those people managed to sneak into the Yu Garden. Jinwan was deep in thought. Could it be that back then Director Mo personally went to the Yu Garden? If he hadn't gone personally, Auntie Chen wouldn't have opened the door. Mo Jingshin's tone was calm. This matter can't be blamed on her. I won't do anything to her. Relax. Her thoughts were seen through again. This man was really scary. Jinwan grinned. It's not her fault in the first place. It's fine as long as you don't shift the blame to Andy Chen. If you want to protect Andy Chen, just say it. Mo Jingshin glanced at her, his low voice escaping from his throat. Today, come back to the company with me. When I have a meeting, the break room in the office is yours. Jinwan was quite excited to be able to sleep in his break room openly. However, she pretended to be innocent as she asked, Will I disturb you there? Speaking of which, Mo Jingshin understood her better than she had imagined. He knew that she did not want to return to the Yu Garden right now. If she returned to Aolan International alone, she would not be able to sleep well. Mo Jingshin's handsome brows rose slightly. How can I disturb you when I'm sleeping? Are you going to take off your clothes and run into my arms when you're sleepwalking? Jinwan pursed her lips. This was probably what Great Boss Missouri wanted to see her sleepwalking, right? If you don't mind the eyes of the other people in the conference room, I certainly don't mind giving it a try. Jinwan had always been good at talking. She would never lose out in a verbal argument. The man's hand around her waist tightened, and his voice was close to her ear. After last night, Mrs. Mo's knowledge in this area has really made me look at you in a new light. There's no hurry to get into my arms in the conference room. As for the other requests you mentioned last night, I can satisfy them tonight. Mo Jingshin's seductive and gentle voice pressed against her ears. His fingers seemed to touch her lips. The needs she mentioned last night, it went without saying. Jinwan's thick skin instantly reached the boiling point. She raised her hand and slapped his hand away. I don't need it. Previously, I only wanted to help you out of desperation. Now it's too late. Jinwan opened her mouth and bit down hard when his fingertip entered her lips. The man chuckled softly. Thinking of being shy now, isn't it too late? Jinwan angrily bit down on his finger again. She then felt that this action was too lustful and immediately pushed his hand away. She turned to look out the window and composed herself. However, she realized that Mo Jingshin's laughter was really pleasant to listen to. His voice was by her ear. It was as though warmth was slowly enveloping her from behind. It was slightly husky, magnetic, and mild. It was as though gravity was pulling her closer with every passing second. Mo Corporation. Mo Jingshin did not rest for a moment. By the time he arrived at the company, it was already past 10 in the morning. He immediately headed for a meeting. Jinwan's heart ached for his torment last night. However, she knew that he had always been a strict and serious person when it came to work. She did not disturb him. Knowing that he knew his limits, she returned to his office. Today in the conference room, all the executives found that CEO Mo's mental state was slightly more tired than usual. Although it was not obvious, they could still see it. However, even so, CEO Mo appeared to be in a good mood. There was less of his usual coldness and sternness. Even when he was listening to the reports from the various departments, there was a hint of gentleness on his lips. All the executives were shocked. After all, in this report there were problems with 2 departments. CEO Mo's attitude right now, they did not know if it was the calm before the storm or if something had happened. It was rare for CEO Mo to be so amiable in the company. When the meeting ended, the executives filed out of the conference room. Someone whispered, CEO Mo seems to be in a good mood today? It's rare for a meeting to end so quickly. He's letting us go after just an hour? It should be because there's someone waiting for him in CEO Mo's office. Who? Which deity could make CEO Mo so easy to talk to? For the first time ever, he ended the weekly meeting half an hour early. It seems to be CEO Mo's wife. Shinmu was just about to head to the conference room to tidy up the documents. Seeing that CEO Mo had already come out, he rushed over. CEO Mo, secretary, and has just sent an electronic resignation letter over. Should the resignation be submitted to the HR department, or should I directly approve it? Shinmu asked softly. Mo Jingshan replied coldly, just approve it. All right, I understand. Has Jinwan eaten yet? Mo Jingshan glanced at the time, asking in a heavy voice. Shinmu nodded. Earlier at 11 o'clock p.m., I originally wanted to send someone to a nearby hotel to bring her a nutritious lunch. However, she said that she would be fine eating the company's staff meal. I followed her request and brought her lunch from the staff cafeteria. Right now she should be almost done eating. Staff meal? Mo Jingshan's brows moved. He did not say more and directly entered the elevator. When they reached the office, Mo Jingshan pushed open the door. Inside the office, Jinwan sat quietly on the sofa. In her hands was a disposable lunchbox. Inside was simple white rice and several vegetables and meat dishes. Although the Mo Corporation staff meal was also nutritious, it was still too simple. It was even more common than ordinary home-cooked dishes. Looking at the lunchbox in her hands and then at Jinwan's satisfied expression, Mo Jingshan's usually calm eyes revealed a trace of gentleness. How do you feel eating the staff meal? Jinwan was originally enjoying her meal and did not notice the movements in front of the door. The moment she heard the voice, she subconsciously stood up. The lunchbox in her hands almost fell to the ground. Chapter 136. Hearing Jinwan's evaluation, Mo Jingshan approached and stood before her. His gaze landed on the lunchbox by her side. Jinwan pointed with her chopsticks. Earlier, I asked Shinmu to bring another portion up. I planned to eat it after you returned from your meeting. I didn't expect your meeting to be so short today. It's perfect to eat it while it's hot. But be careful, it's still a little hot. Mo Jingshan watched Jinwan, who sat on the sofa and ate the simple employee meal with a satisfied expression. Is it really that good? He asked with a low chuckle. Jinwan nodded seriously. And then, no wonder so many people want to work for Mo Corporation. Even the quality of the employee meal is so good. It's clear that the other companies can't even hope to compare to our treatment in other aspects. She raised her eyes to look at him as she ate. The man was dressed in a black suit. The traces of dispiritedness from last night had faded away. He stood in the bright office and was especially eye-catching and good-looking. Mo Jingshan picked up the lunchbox and sat by her side. He glanced at her eating manner and smiled faintly. He did not say anything and sat there to accompany her to eat. The office door was tightly shut. Otherwise, anyone who saw this scene would be shocked to the point their jaws dropped. Mo Corporation CEO boss did not discuss the hundreds of millions of US dollars in the afternoon. Instead, he sat lazily and calmly on the sofa in the office, accompanying Mrs. Mo to eat the employee meal. From time to time, he would bring her favorite stir-fried meat. As he did so, he said, "If you like it, ask Shinmu to bring you another portion." "There's no need. This is enough. If I continue eating like this, I'll really get fat. Even if I get fat, I want you. What are you afraid of?" No, I'm already full. My stomach is about to burst. You don't want the shredded potatoes? Then I'll eat a few more bites. Do you want the fried tofu? After the meal, someone from the secretary's office called to say that a representative from a partner company wanted to meet CEO Mo. To avoid disturbing his work, Jinwan pushed open the door to the break room and entered. She had just taken a step in when she heard Mo Jingshan say from outside, "You were drenched in the rain last night. Take a hot shower and have a good sleep. I'll call you after I'm done." Jinwan raised her hand and made an okay gesture before entering the break room. She had been to the break room in his office before. It was when she came over to coax him back to the U Garden. After such a long time, Jinwan finally had the time to check on his break room. It was in the same minimalistic style as Aolan International, with cool colors. Back then, Grandfather Mo had been involved in the renovation of the U Garden. However, Aolan International and this break room clearly belonged to Mo Jingshan's style. Simple, low-key and plain. But because it was the place where Mo Jingshan used to live, the cold color made Jinwan feel inexplicably intimate and warm. Because she had been drenched last night, she only took a shower in the hotel bathroom and didn't take a good shower. Now her body and head were a little itchy and she couldn't just lie on the bed to sleep. She opened the wardrobe to take one of Mo Jingshan's shirts as a change of clothes and then take a shower. However, the moment the wardrobe door was opened, she was shocked to see that half of the space in Mo Jingshan's wardrobe was actually filled with women's clothes. They were all new. Thin, thick, long, short, inside, outside women's clothes. Jinwan took one out in shock and found that it was in her size. She then flipped through the others and found that they were all in her size. She found a thin shirt suitable for sleeping and held it in her arms. She knew that Mo Jingshan was busy in the office and couldn't go out to ask him, so she picked up her phone and sent him a message. "When did you prepare so many clothes for me in the wardrobe? I just opened the wardrobe. You gave me a fright." After sending the message, she waited for about a minute. Seeing that he didn't reply, she guessed that he was busy and went straight into the bathroom. After showering and drying her hair, she came out wearing the clothes Mo Jingshan had prepared for her. She carried the fragrant scent of shower gel and threw herself onto the large bed in the break room. She picked up her phone and saw the reply Mo Jingshan had sent her several minutes ago. "The day after that time you wore my shirt." Jinwan stared at the phone screen in surprise. She was sure he was talking about the day after. The day after? He moved so quickly? At that time he clearly didn't plan on moving back to the master bedroom. Even though their relationship had improved, they weren't too intimate. Yet, at that time he had already made preparations that she would one day stay in his break room? Exactly how black-bellied was this man? Jinwan really wanted to reply, but considering that he was currently working and that he clearly had work to do in the afternoon, she held it in and placed her phone down. She flipped over and lay on the bed, her eyes occasionally glancing at the wardrobe. Her hands were crossed in front of her chest, casually moving her fingers. However, her mind seemed to have flown into the clouds, giving her a surreal feeling. She picked up the phone by the pillow and looked at the 15 words and 2 punctuation marks he had just sent. After staring at it for a long time, she suddenly smiled and placed the phone down. She buried her face in the pillow and laughed. What should she do? Great Boss Mo's ability to tease her was becoming harder and harder to control. A few clothes and a message were enough to make her unable to calm down. Jinwan flipped over again, thinking that she wouldn't be able to sleep anymore. However, last night had been so thrilling, and her mental state was unable to take it. She closed her eyes and began to count sheep, forcing herself to sleep. 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep for sheep. 98 Mo Jingshans, 99 Mo Jingshans, 100 Mo Jingshans, 101 Mo Jingshans. Jinwan abruptly grabbed the pillow and pressed it against her head. Damn it, she couldn't sleep. The man outside was still focused on his work. Right now, her maiden heart was already stirred to the point where she couldn't sleep. In a certain staff office in the Mo Corporation, discussions were rife. "I heard that Assistant Shen sent 2 sets of employee meals to the CEO's office today. Guess who those 2 sets of employee meals were for? It can't be Mrs. Mo, right? I heard that Mrs. Mo used to be the young miss of the famous Ji family in Haicheng. Since she was young, she ate all kinds of delicacies and high-end food. No matter how ordinary it was, it would definitely be prepared by a highly skilled helper or chef. She definitely wouldn't eat employee meals. That might not be the case. Our company's employee meals are clean and delicious. Even CEO Mo would occasionally eat them when he's especially busy. Mrs. Mo is also a person. It's not strange for her to eat employee meals with CEO Mo in the office. Impossible, she definitely wouldn't eat it. Do you want to make a bet? All of a sudden, Shenmu stood in front of the office door. He coughed and cleared his throat, speaking sternly. Why are you all standing together and discussing? Are you all done with your work? Aren't you all too free? In an instant, the employees scattered like birds, quickly leaving. Chapter 137. In the evening, it was almost time to knock off. Mo Corporation's CEO's office. The business partners received a satisfactory contract and chatted politely for over 10 minutes before finally leaving. The office returned to silence. Mo Jingshan's gaze landed in the direction of the break room. After the secretary and assistant came in to report on the day's work, he glanced at the time and closed the documents in his hands. He stood up and walked to the door of the break room. It was very quiet inside. It could be seen that Jinwan had indeed fallen asleep. The door to the break room was quietly pushed open. On the soft, large bed, Jinwan slept soundly. Her soft, long hair covered the pillow, and her sleeping face was peaceful and peaceful. Her phone was placed by the pillow within reach. It was as though he could see that she was still debating whether to pick up her phone to reply to his message before she fell asleep. Mo Jingshan smiled and picked up her phone, placing it on the bedside table. Jinwan slept too soundly. Mo Jingshan sat down by the bed and watched her sleep. He did not move and only watched her like this. In the stormy night, the little woman seemed to have descended from the sky, climbing up from the balcony and rushing into his arms with a body full of injuries. The scene repeatedly replayed before his eyes. He stared at her for a long time. The red marks on Jinwan's face had already faded to the point where they could no longer be seen. Mo Jingshan held one of her hands and turned it over. He looked at the wound on her palm. Although it was very small and not considered serious, because it had not been disinfected, the edges of the wound were slightly red. He stood up and walked out of the break room, calling Shinmu to buy some medicine. Not long after, Mo Jingshan received the medicine and returned to the break room. It was so quiet that there was not a single sound. He could only vaguely hear Jinwan's light breathing as she slept. It had a gentle frequency, causing one to feel that this room was peaceful and quiet. The medicine that Mo Jingshan had Shinmu buy was not as painful as disinfectant alcohol. However, when Jinwan's palm was suddenly lightly sprinkled with the medicine, it still felt slightly itchy and painful due to the anti-inflammatory ingredients. Even though it was not obvious, she still furrowed her brows uneasily in her sleep. Ugh! She instinctively wanted to retract her hand and let out a soft moan in discomfort. Mo Jingshan held her hand and didn't let her draw it back. As Jinwan struggled harder, he bent down and gently kissed her on the lips. Finally, because the numbness on her lips overwhelmed the slight itch and pain in her palm, her furrowed brows gradually relaxed and she went back to sleep. Her cherry-colored lips curved into a faint smile as though she had a sweet dream. When the little woman slept, there was a special kind of sweet temptation. If it weren't for the fact that both his hands were occupied and he had to continue applying medicine for her, Mo Jingshan would not mind pressing her under his body and kissing her harshly for a while longer. He slowly got up and gently held her hand. He slowly sprinkled white medicinal powder on the small wounds on her palm. The wounds weren't serious and didn't need to be wrapped with gauze, but the simple disinfection and anti-inflammatory process couldn't be neglected. Jinwan's clothes were thin and loose. Mo Jingshan could easily pull her sleeves open and apply medicine on the wound on her arm. He then lifted the hem of her clothes. The man who was about to continue applying medicine on her leg paused for a moment. After showering, she had directly put on these clothes. There was nothing under the clothes and the scenery under the clothes was completely exposed. Mo Jingshan suppressed the fire burning in his eyes. After applying medicine on the wound on her leg, he placed the medicine on the bedside cabinet. Then he lowered his eyes. He watched the little woman who instinctively curled up her legs due to the slight coldness of the blanket being pulled aside and the hem of her clothes. Last night the two of them did not rest well. Originally he should have let her sleep a little longer. However, this scene was too shocking. Mo Jingshan's extraordinary self-control, which he was able to maintain last night under the effects of the medicine, almost completely collapsed at this moment. He bent down and picked up a strand of her hair. The fragrance of the shampoo and shower gel mixed with the faint fragrance of her body. Mo Jingshan curved his lips, planting a kiss on her hair. He then tilted his head, planting a kiss on her fair and beautiful brows. Slowly, he moved down to her small and straight nose, and then slowly covered the soft lips that he had not kissed enough earlier. The warm, soft, and beautiful touch caused the man to feel a momentary sense of submission towards Gu Jingshan. His kiss gradually deepened. No matter how deep Jinwan's sleep was, she still opened her eyes. However, she was not fully awake. Her slightly dazed eyes saw the man above her. Seeing that it was Mo Jingshan who was kissing her, she did not resist. Taking advantage of the gap between their lips, she murmured with a smile, "Are you done with your work?" And Mo Jingshan's movements did not stop. His palm had already touched the softness of her chest through her thin clothes. The kiss on her lips deepened, and his other hand held her waist. The man's kiss moved past her cheeks, lingered on her lips and slowly moved down to her neck. Because Jinwan had actually fallen asleep under him, the man suddenly bit down on her collarbone, causing her to shiver. The moment she opened her eyes, she drowsily raised her hand to press her head. "What time is it?" She had just woken up and asked hoarsely. "It's already time to get off work." The man continued kissing her collarbone and neck, but this time the kiss was more passionate and intense. His voice was as hoarse as hers. Jinwan was about to get up but was unable to. Only then did she realize what Mo Jingshan was doing to her body. Her sleepiness was completely gone. Before she could speak, the man's hand had already reached under her clothes. His scorching palm caressed her back and moved up, pressing her entire body firmly into his embrace. Under her slightly surprised gaze, He held the back of her neck and kissed her harshly twice on the lips. "You're awake." "And I'm awake." Jinwan was startled. She realized that they were still in the break room beside his office, which meant that they were still in his company. She mumbled against his lips, "What are you doing? What do you think I'm doing?" He chuckled softly. In an instant, he kissed her until she almost forgot what night it was. Finally, the man's actions became more and more excessive. Jinwan was provoked into moaning, softly asking, "You didn't sleep much last night. Today you came straight to the company. Is your body able to take it?" What she meant was that she was worried that he did not sleep well last night. After staying up late and working so hard, she wanted him to take this opportunity to have a good sleep. Chapter 138. What I mean is, before Jinwan could finish her words, Mo Jingshan's kiss was already hot and intense. He pried open her lips and invaded her teeth. This is the company, the office." Jinwan wanted to speak, but her words were choppy. Every word was swallowed by him. Even the places he kissed were more intense than before, causing her to tremble non-stop. Her neck, collarbone, shoulders, chest, and even further down, Jinwan was very sensitive, so sensitive that her entire body trembled from his teasing. Those kisses were filled with an even more passionate and infatuated flavor, causing one to be unable to extricate themselves. He tasted every inch of her, not letting go of a single trace of her sweetness. "Even if you're off work, there should still be people in your company." "Ugh, don't. Let's go home first." "Not good." The man's resolute and decisive voice landed on her lips once more. Under Jinwan's nervous and embarrassed expression he said, "Weren't you very powerful last night? Are you going to shrug it off today?" Jinwan narrowed her eyes at him. "Mo Jingshan, don't fail to appreciate my kindness. Yesterday I was en." He suddenly kissed the softest and most sensitive spot behind her ear. She immediately moaned, and then she heard Mo Jingshan nibbling on her ear. His voice was rough and low, which he had been holding back for a long time. "Last night, if it weren't for the surveillance cameras, I would have definitely done it until you couldn't say a single word. Jinwan, how could I let you go now?" She clearly felt that the man could no longer restrain himself. His lower body was hot and dangerously pressing against her. Jinwan whimpered from his kiss and didn't know where to place her hands for a moment. In the next instant, Mo Jingshan pulled up her hand from the bedsheets and pressed it against his body. "Come, I'll satisfy you." His voice was low and there was a hint of naughtiness in it. She suddenly shivered and couldn't retract her hand no matter how hard she tried. The temperature of her hand was so hot that her whole body felt like it was burning. She blushed and turned her head away to avoid looking at him. This was the first time he had broken through the original boundaries. She could only blame herself for daring to say anything in a moment of desperation last night. Now she finally suffered the consequences. In just a moment, her hands were sore and tired. However, because of the movements of her hands, Mo Jingshan planted numerous kisses on her shoulders and cheeks. "I can't take it anymore." She was now annoyed by the emptiness. Just as she was about to retract her hand, her wrist was clasped by the man's palm. She kept trying to break free, but she was tightly controlled by him and pressed back again. "Mo Jingshan." Jinwan's expression was angry, but her voice was hoarse and soft. "And?" The man sucked her earlobe and said hoarsely, "Continue?" Jinwan wanted to cry, but no tears came out. The heat on her face was almost comparable to the heat in her palms. It was similarly scorching hot. The phone that Mo Jingshan had casually tossed onto the bedside suddenly vibrated at this moment. "Go answer the phone first." Jinwan's voice was soft, and her eyes were moist and red. Although she did not want to cry, she was almost forced to. He really brought this upon himself. Why did she mention using her hands yesterday? Mo Jingshan glanced at her before glancing at the phone on the bedside table. He saw that the caller was in Shu Yan. He reached out to hang up, lowering his head to place a kiss on Jinwan's face. He chuckled softly, "Your hands are sore?" However, Jinwan turned to look at the phone on the bedside table. "Who's calling? Why aren't you answering?" Before she could finish speaking, his phone began vibrating again. This time, she paid attention and raised her head slightly to see the caller ID on his phone. It was still a string of numbers without a note. She recognized the numbers. It was actually in Shu Yan. "She called me twice in a row. Something must have happened, right?" Mo Jingshan was expressionless as he calmly said, "Her electronic resignation letter has already been submitted to the company. Shinmu will handle it. There's no need for me to handle it." Jinwan took the opportunity to move her hand up slightly, avoiding the man's heated gaze. She took the initiative to pass his phone to him. Then I'm even more curious. She's going to return to America soon and has already taken the initiative to resign. What else can she talk to you about? Curious. Mo Jingshan's brows coldly furrowed. The phone gradually stopped vibrating. 10 seconds later it rang again. Mo Jingshan saw Jinwan's insistence and stood up. At the same time he pulled her up and pressed her into his embrace. He held her waist with one hand to prevent her from escaping and used the other to pick up the phone. He pressed the speaker button. The moment the call connected, Mo Jingshan's tone was extremely calm. What's the matter? And Shuyan was silent for a moment. After a moment she softly said, Mo, I've just received my resignation letter. The speed was very fast. Did you approve it? The man was indifferent. It was Shinmu. The other side of the phone was silent for a long moment before Shuyan's slightly soft voice came through. You don't even plan on handling my resignation letter. You're really heartless and cold to people unrelated to you. Jinwan sat on his lap, watching the man's cold and indifferent face. Only now did she feel that the Mo Jingshan that others said was hard to approach was true. Mo Jingshan remained extremely cold. When you came you didn't ask for my permission. When you leave there's even less of a need to wait for my approval. And Shuyan instantly tightened her grip on the phone. What he meant was that her coming and going had nothing to do with him. From the start to the end, there was no need for her to leave a single trace at his place? This was indeed Mo Jingshan's style. And Shuyan calmed herself down and said, What Uncle Mo means is that after we settle all the details of the cooperation with the Mo Corporation in China, we'll return to America next weekend. I'll go back with him, but before that, my father and I will stay with him at the Mo family for a few days. Mo Jingshan did not speak, only calmly listening. Also, my father has already planned on canceling my engagement with the Wilson family. That's your problem. There's no need to tell me. Mo Jingshan's attitude was extremely indifferent. And Shuyan sighed slightly. She clearly knew that he was unwilling to listen. After thinking for a moment she still said what she wanted to say. Previously, I heard the Ji family's second miss mention some things. She mentioned Jinwan's recent changes. From some of the details, don't you think that Jinwan is hiding something from you? Jinwan listened by the side. She slightly raised her brows, meeting Mo Jingshan's indifferent gaze. She smiled at him, suddenly leaning close to his ear. Using Shuyan's tone, she softly said, Don't you think that Jinwan is hiding something from you? Mo Jingshan chuckled softly and pinched the waist of the naughty woman in his arms. He was still cold and indifferent to the person on the other end of the phone. This is my private matter. No one has the right to interfere or ask. Mo Jingshan directly hung up, tossing his phone to the side. He abruptly threw Jinwan, who was mischievously causing trouble by his ear, onto the bed. His long legs blocked her thighs, leaning over and pressing down. Chapter 139. Jinwan did not even have the chance to struggle or cry out. The man pressed her down on the bed and kissed her until she was out of breath. This was Mo Jingshan's resting room. His scent was everywhere. His open arms were enough to cover the sky. There was no way for her to escape. What did you hide from me? Mo Jingshan glanced at her, speaking in a low voice. At the same time he tugged at the collar of his shirt. His movements were natural and casual, but in Jinwan's eyes, it was extremely seductive. I've actually hidden a lot from you. For example, pretending to love you every day. Only then can I gain your complete trust. Then one day when the time is right, I'll poison you, and the Mo Corporation in your hands and shine in the future will belong to me. Jinwan blinked at him as she spoke. She acted as though she was telling the truth. Is that all you're capable of? Mo Jingshan held her waist, pressing her against his lower body. Jinwan felt some pain from the pressure. She raised her head to look at him, but before she could complain, he pressed her down again. The man's voice was clear and heavy. Based on how infatuated I am with you, you can easily control my thoughts and actions. There's no need to poison me at all. Right now, Mo Corporation can be transferred to your name and owned by you. I'm all yours. Whatever you want, isn't it all just a matter of a single word? I'm joking. I'm not joking. He looked at her. Jinwan felt uncomfortable from the heat of his lower body. She tried to twist her body to avoid his dangerous resistance. Continue. He gave a simple order. He pulled her hand down, watching her face that was once again filled with heat. He glanced at her bashful appearance. Continue? She had already received a call and she still wanted to continue. Jinwan's evil thoughts of revenge rose. The moment her hand reached down, she suddenly used force. After Mo Jingshan let out a muffled groan, she paused. In an instant, it was as though she was inspired. She was finally willing to act like a serious beginner, learning from the videos she had seen online. Continue. Mo Jingshan's breathing became increasingly hurried. Just as Jin Wan seemed to have grasped his sensitive spot and began to exert more force, he held the back of her head with one hand, forcing her to raise her head. He pressed against her harshly and bent down to kiss her heavily on the lips. Jin Wan could even hear his slightly uncontrollable panting. His other hand suddenly slid down her back to the back of her waist, caressing and teasing every inch of her skin before pressing into his embrace. I have indeed underestimated you. His voice was already tainted with a strong sense of lust. It was as difficult to restrain the strength and grace of his hand that was firmly pressed behind her head. Without giving Jin Wan any time to catch her breath, Jin Wan could only hear the crisp sound of the belt on his waist. She couldn't help but let out a low moan as her waist sunk in. Mo Jingshan's kiss left her neck. He raised his head and landed on her lips. His kiss was gentle and delicate. Jin Wan was afraid that she would make a sound. After all, this place was right next to his office. She turned her head away and bit her lip harshly. He lifted a strand of hair that had fallen over her shoulder and tucked it behind her ear. Remember my words, what are you talking about? I'm yours. The man's low and heavy voice exploded in her mind. Jin Wan abruptly opened her eyes and saw that in the depths of his eyes, only her reflection was imprinted. She was going to die. Was he using a big move on her? Jin Wan was already about to overflow. Because of his gaze, she suddenly moaned softly and raised her hand to cover her face. Mo Jingshan chuckled lightly. He pulled her hand away and brought it to his lips for a kiss. Knock knock. There was a sudden knock on the door of the break room. When Jin Wan heard the knock on the door, she immediately shivered and hurriedly tried to stop, but Mo Jingshan held her firmly and didn't let her escape. Mo Jingshan didn't let her escape. There's someone, she softly said in a hoarse voice. Shenmu, who was standing outside the door, had actually braced himself to come. After all, it was already time to get off work. He also knew that Jin Wan was here. Right now, both CEO Mo and Jin Wan were in the break room. Him knocking on this door was clearly an act of sending himself to death. However, Director Mo had suddenly come to inspect the company. Regardless of whether he was the chairman of Shine Group or CEO Mo's father, there was no way to stop him. CEO Mo, are you asleep? As Shenmu spoke, he felt his scalp turning numb. He felt that his little life was about to end. When Jin Wan heard that it was Shenmu, she guessed that he had already guessed the situation inside. Her body was as tense as a drawn bow. She was so tense that she did not dare to move. Mo Jingshan also trembled because of her body's instinctive reaction due to her nervousness. He abruptly lowered his head and bit down on her fair shoulder, barely holding back the moan that almost escaped his lips. What followed next was like a reward and punishment. Not only did the man's actions not stop, they became even more violent and impudent. Yet it was extremely comfortable. Jin Wan glared at him and could not help but moan softly. Outside, could it be that they had already heard it? While she was worried, she was also stimulated to the point that her entire body was trembling. She clearly knew that this was not the right time to continue, yet she was willing to sink into it and be consigned to eternal damnation. Jin Wan woke up from a slight jolt. She opened her eyes and discovered that she was in a limousine, separated from the driver's seat in front. Her memory paused at the moment when her mind was about to scatter. It was as though she could still remember the impudent act that surpassed her rationality. She abruptly turned her head, only to meet Mo Jingshan's deep and boundless gaze. Mo Jingshan, you really fainted at the right time. Jin Wan completely did not expect that she would actually faint. At that time she really could not gather her emotions. She could not remember how it ended, how she showered, or how she put on her clothes. She narrowed her eyes at him. In the future, I'll never go to your company again. Shenmu most likely already knew about it. Mo Jingshan chuckled hoarsely, rubbing her puffed-up face. We're husband and wife. What can he do even if he doesn't know? The man was still dressed in a well-fitted suit. This simple suit and shirt style might not look good on other men, but on Mo Jingshan, it gave off a refreshing feeling. It was surprisingly fitting and perfectly matched his cold, indifferent, yet well-mannered character. Back then, Shenmu suddenly came to the office to look for you. Did something happen? Jin Wan did not wish to discuss the incident in the break room and directly changed the topic. The people from Shine Group came to the company for a surprise inspection. They only arrived for half an hour before leaving. Mo Jingshan's hand slowly rubbed Jinwan's earlobe, a hint of a smile in his eyes. At that time, I had already carried you into the bathroom and soaked you in a daze. Chapter 140. Jinwan turned to look out and found that they had arrived at the main gate of the Yu Garden. Mo Jingshan finally let go of her, helped her adjust the collar of her coat, opened the door and motioned for her to get out of the car. Jinwan's hands and feet were sore from being tossed around by him. As soon as she opened the car door, she almost fell down. Fortunately, Mo Jingshan was behind her and reached out to support her. He quietly pressed her into his arms and glanced down at her. Receiving Jinwan's hateful glare, he immediately understood her situation, and the corners of his lips turned up in a triumphant smile. Previously she said she would do it, but now she couldn't say a word. He really did it? Jinwan rolled her eyes at him, steadied herself and walked inside. Madam. Auntie Chen came out to welcome her. The moment she saw Jinwan, she immediately stood in front of the door with an apologetic expression. Her eyes were worried and apologetic. Seeing Auntie Chen's expression, Jinwan smiled at her and intimately held Auntie Chen's arm to say, "No matter what happened before, it's not your fault. Don't think too much. Look, I'm fine, aren't I?" In fact, Auntie Chen didn't know what had happened, but when she came back today she checked the surveillance footage of the Yu Garden and saw the scene of Jinwan being taken away. Only then did she realize what a big mistake she had made yesterday. She actually opened the door and let in the people who could threaten Jinwan, and then she was sent out, causing Jinwan to be in danger after returning home alone. She really shouldn't have done that. Later she called the Mo family, apologized to Elder Mo, and asked about the situation. After confirming that Jinwan was fine, she was reassured to wait at home. I've seen the surveillance footage. At that time, it was clearly Director Mo who said he wanted to enter the Yu Garden to see where you and Mr. Mo live now, but in the surveillance footage, who on earth took you away? Auntie Chen was still full of apology, holding Jinwan's hand with lingering fear and kept asking. It's all right. No matter who they are, I'm standing in front of you safe and sound. Jinwan patted her hand and asked with concern, You called the Mo family, didn't you? Grandfather didn't blame you, did he? Auntie Chen shook her head and looked at Jinwan with heartache. Don't worry about us. Go in and sit for a while. You must not have had a good rest these days. You must be frightened, right? I'll make you some tranquilizer soup to calm your nerves. Jinwan pursed her lips into a smile and nodded. She turned to see that Mo Jingshan had already entered the door and rushed to follow him in. However, she saw that the man was standing in front of the television, his eyes dark as he watched the surveillance video that the helper had brought out. On the screen he saw everything that happened after Jinwan returned home alone. Jinwan could feel the cold and stern emotions in his dark gaze. She stared at the image on the television for a long time. She walked over and placed her hand in his, saying, At the time, those two people didn't want to hurt me. Later on, I was only sent to one of Director Mo's private villas in High City. Aside from locking me up, they didn't do anything to me. After that, grandfather rushed over and took me away. After saying this, she asked the servant for the remote control and decisively turned off the TV. It's true. That day, aside from being a little scared and worried about you, I wasn't hurt at all. Jinwan's warm and soft voice was close by his side. Her hand was still pressed against his palm. Delete this surveillance video. Don't look at it anymore. If I made you feel the slightest bit scared, it was because I didn't do well enough. Mo Jingshan held her hand, his voice low and heavy. Jinwan dragged him back to the room. After entering the room, she hugged him and rubbed her face against his chest. She said softly, You didn't do well enough. In this world, there's no man who treats me better than you. You haven't rested. Don't think about it. Sleep early tonight, okay? The man lowered his head to look at her. His long and powerful fingers ran through her long hair, and his other hand wrapped around her waist, locking her in his embrace. Recalling the scene he had seen in the surveillance camera, he said in a low voice, I'll sleep later. I'll accompany you for a while first. I don't need to accompany you. He held her and sat on the edge of the bed. He pressed her head against his shoulder and snuggled up to her. Jinwan buried her head in his embrace. Previously, she thought that she would not be able to sleep well for several days after returning to the Yu Garden. However, after a moment, the shadow in her heart completely dissipated. In fact, as long as the Mo family did not come, even an unidentified fly would not be able to enter. There was no place safer than the Yu Garden. Mo Jingshan did not speak. She knew that his current mood was affected by the surveillance video earlier and did not break the silence. She reached out to hold his hand and gestured with her own hand in his palm. Time passed bit by bit. Seeing that Mo Jingshan still had no intention of sleeping, Jinwan began to find a topic to talk about while playing with his fingers. Do you really know a great deal about me before? She asked. Mo Jingshan glanced at her. Are you very curious about this? No, I don't have any dark cards up my sleeves that I'm afraid others will use against me. It's just that there are some things in the Ji family that I can't bring up to the surface. However, those are all things that I used to target my father and Andy Shin. Jinwan leaned into his embrace. Then do you know that when I was a teenager I studied in America for a few years? Although I wasn't particularly serious in my studies, I still managed to get all A's. If not for my good grades, I would have had to continue studying in America for a few more years. Perhaps I would have missed the opportunity to marry you. Mo Jingshan's gaze suddenly became very deep. He looked at her. When you were studying in America, I was also in America. The fate that should come will come sooner or later. I won't miss it. Based on what you're saying, do you think we've met before? Jinwan raised her head to look at him. Mo Jingshan's brows moved slightly. He smiled meaningfully and suddenly lowered his head to kiss her. Why did you suddenly kiss me? Jinwan was afraid that the reason he did not sleep was because he wanted to continue squeezing her. She subconsciously wanted to jump out of his embrace. If they were to do it again today, she would definitely lose her life. Previously she was already half dead. She felt that right now her little life was in his hands. Mo Jingshan did not answer her earlier question. He only softly said, previously I said that the person I'm bringing you to meet will come over tomorrow. You don't have to wake up too early. If you want to go out, wait for the person to come before going out. After speaking, he finally let go of her and got up to take a shower. Jinwan laid on the bed and looked at the messages on her phone. When he came out, she was just about to bring her laptop to the study when the man who came out of the bathroom pulled her onto the bed. Chapter 141. Hurry and go to sleep. I'll go to the study. Jinwan reached out to retrieve the laptop that had fallen on the carpet by the bed. Mo Jingshan placed her on the bed and pressed his body against hers. He planted a kiss on her swollen lips that had been ravaged in the afternoon. Tired? He kissed her. Jinwan nodded seriously. She was really tired. She almost hugged his thigh and begged him to spare her life. This man's stamina was not something she could handle. He lowered his head and kissed her ear. Then, he lay down beside her and stretched out his long arms to hold her in his arms. His low and husky voice was accompanied by his warm breath in her ear. Sleep with me, En? Jinwan obediently put down the computer and did not insist on going to the study. She turned around and buried herself in his arms, holding him with both hands. She gently said in his arms, all right. The next day, when Jinwan woke up, it was already past 9 in the morning. After washing up, she changed her clothes and went downstairs. Seeing Auntie Chin busily serving breakfast to the dining table, she felt that she hadn't felt this warm and peaceful in a long time. After breakfast, Jinwan went straight to the studio. As soon as she stepped out of the villa, she looked up and was stunned to see a tall, thin, short-haired woman about 1.7 meters tall standing in the yew garden by her car. Jinwan subconsciously took a step back and turned to ask Auntie Chin, who is this? Can any stranger enter the yew garden now? Auntie Chin walked out, took a look and answered with a smile, Madam, Mr. Mo let her in. Mr. Mo said to let her follow you from now on. Follow me? Jinwan paused for a moment before returning to herself. She turned to look at the tall, thin, short-haired young woman. Mrs. Mo, my name is Feng Ling. I've trained at the 11 Training Center in the United States for 8 years. From today onwards, I'll be your personal bodyguard. Seeing Jinwan's shocked and confused look, the man reached out to open the car door, motioned for Jinwan to get in and gestured for her to get in. They seemed to be well trained. Jinwan secretly wondered. Could it be that the person Mo Jingshan wanted her to meet was this person in front of her? A female bodyguard? Did Mo Jingshan really ask you to come? Jinwan asked. She had only seen male bodyguards. This was her first time seeing a female bodyguard. Feng Ling answered respectfully and seriously. Yes, Mrs. Mo Jinwan. Jinwan looked at her for a long time, but since she was sent by Mo Jingshan, she had no reason to be suspicious. She opened the door of the driver's side and was about to get in when Feng Ling suddenly said, Mrs. Mo, you should sit here. I'll drive you. Are you driving? Yes, when you go out in the future, whether you're driving or taking other cars, I have to be by your side. I'll also drive the car to ensure your safety. All right. This bodyguard was too serious and rigid. Jinwan guessed that she was completely obedient and did not make things difficult for her. She walked around the car and sat on the passenger seat where the door was already open. After getting on the car, she told him where she was going and then picked up her cell phone to call Mo Jingshan. When the call connected, Mo Jingshan directly pointed out the purpose of her call. "What is it? About the bodyguards? The person you said you wanted me to meet is the bodyguard you arranged for me? This Feng Ling?" Jinwan turned to look at Feng Ling, who was driving. The other party was completely unaffected by her call and continued to drive without a word. Nanheng is the direct superior of 11 training center in America. Feng Ling is the most skilled and has the highest level of training there. "Initially, I planned to have Nanheng introduce you to her," Mo Jingshan calmly explained to her. "Nanheng has an urgent matter to attend to in America this morning. He doesn't plan to waste any more time, so he sent Feng Ling to the U Garden to meet you." Jinwan did not have much of an impression of Nanheng, but she knew that the two closest brothers to Mo Jingshan were Qin Siding and Nanheng, who was once famous in Haicheng and later became famous in America. She was not very clear about this person's background. She only knew that he was close to Mo Jingshan and seemed to be in the arms business. He was the type who licked blood from the tip of a gun. "From today onwards, Feng Ling will be your personal bodyguard. Her skills are not bad and she is quiet and reticent. She won't disturb you and will only stay by your side when necessary. At other times she won't make you feel uncomfortable." Jinwan made several sounds of assent and hung up the phone. She then turned to look at the responsible bodyguard. After thinking for a moment, she sent a message to Mo Jingshan. "You picked so many people, but in the end you chose a female bodyguard for me. Her personality is so old-fashioned and serious. I don't even know how to talk to her." Mo Jingshan replied, "You want me to send a male bodyguard to chat with you?" Jinwan, I can consider this." Mo Jingshan, don't even think about it." Jinwan, after arriving at the Jin Lin building where Mo Nwan's studio was located, Feng Ling parked the car and very consciously disappeared from her sight. As expected, she was well-trained. Jinwan entered the studio. Ever since the studio was invested by Mo Corporation, many things had to be put on the agenda. Jinwan did not forget that she was still carrying a debt of $200 million. Boss. Xiaoba had given Jinwan a call early in the morning. Seeing that Jinwan had arrived, she rushed over to hand the new financial report to her. Previously, Supervisor Su really did something to the report. "Yesterday, I went to the finance department to review it again and redid it based on the company's income and expenditure. It's exactly the same as your budget. There's no difference at all." Jinwan received it and glanced at it. She then raised her brows and glanced at Xiaoba. "You worked overtime in the studio yesterday and redid it yourself?" Xiaoba nodded. Her expression was somewhat bashful yet wanting to be praised. "Right now, many of the people left in the studio aren't very professional. Right now, the finance department is also like a pile of loose sand. I'm not sure if I can do it, so I gave it a try last night." She did not expect this adorable intern assistant to have such a meticulous and serious heart. Jinwan smiled. "Let's start recruiting in the next 2 days. Have the remaining people from the HR department come to my office later." "All right, boss." Xiaoba's face was filled with excitement as she turned to leave. Jinwan suddenly reached out to tug on her collar. "Why are you so excited?" Xiaoba turned back and pushed her glasses. She grinned and said, "Because our studio now has an investment of $200 million. All of the construction projects can continue as normal. Furthermore, we have such a huge backing like Mo Corporation. Just thinking about it makes me feel that we will rise to become the largest real estate company in Haicheng. At that time, I will be the most senior employee in the company. How can I not be excited?" Jinwan. Chapter 142. Jinwan sat in her office, staring at the computer screen on her desk. The studio was still in the stage of preparation. From an outsider's perspective, there were only expenses and no income. No one knew what Jinwan was planning. Some even thought that Mo Jingshan was so rich that he would casually throw her $200 million for her to squander. Even though Jinwan had received such a large investment, her studio was still not viewed favorably by most people. The domestic real estate market continued to decline. Many companies were eager to sell the land they had previously obtained at high prices. Jinwan now had sufficient funds on hand. Not only could the several projects under the studio's name continue to be carried out, but she had also expanded her target to several large cities and suburbs around Hai City. Every place that was valuable to her was marked with a red circle on the electronic map. Which cities would continue to expand in the future, which abandoned residential areas or barren lands that were currently not valued, were also marked with a blue circle. She was purchasing. From an outsider's perspective, she was purchasing crazily. They thought that she did not understand the market and that she would definitely lose everything. All of a sudden there was a knock on the office door. Xiaoba rushed in with an extremely anxious expression. Jin Wan only glanced at her before returning her gaze to the computer screen. She unhurriedly scanned through the map of High City and its surroundings, marking out the places that would definitely be included in the city's plans. Boss Nguyen, that CEO Jin's husband from last time, is here. Xiaoba had run in too much of a rush. She swallowed her saliva before rushing to say, and he brought a few people with him. It seems like he's here to settle scores with us. Jin Wan's hand paused on the mouse. She turned around. CEO Jin's husband? Settle what scores? Her words had just landed when the office door was heavily pushed open with a pung sound. Xiaoba jumped in fright. Jin Wan noticed the few people who had suddenly barged in. The ones walking in front were tall and strong. They appeared to be those unreasonable thugs and bodyguards who wielded machetes and went around demanding debts. With those people clearing the way, a man who was about 40 years old walked in. He was well-dressed, but he didn't have a good expression on his face. Although he didn't look ferocious, he obviously didn't look like a god of plague that could be easily sent away. After the man entered, he looked around the office coldly and arrogantly and finally fixed his eyes on Jin Wan behind the desk. Are you Miss Ji? Jin Wan sat behind the office desk. Her gaze was indifferent and she was unhurried. I remember that the security guards of Jinlin building are rather diligent. To be able to bring someone in like this, you're not simple. As if he didn't expect a young woman to have such a strong aura, the man coldly raised his eyebrows and smiled again. However, his smile made people feel a chill down their spines. I didn't expect Miss Ji to be so daring at such a young age. I've heard about MO Corporation investing in you. I know that Miss Ji has a backer, but no matter how strong your backer is, you shouldn't meddle in other people's business. The man seemed to be smiling, but his tone was cold and unkind. Jin Wan's beautiful brows rose without a trace. I was wondering why you suddenly came here. So it's because your backyard is on fire and you've been suppressing a stomach full of vexation, so you came here to vent it out? As she spoke, Jin Wan chuckled softly. CEO Jin came here to make a fuss a few days ago. The two of you are truly husband and wife. One brought a lawyer to terminate the contract, while the other brought thugs to block the door. Those who don't know would think that the two of you are opening some charaba. You're not even in charge of a proper investment company. The man coldly narrowed his eyes. You also know that I'm here to block the door? I don't wish for your studio to be smashed into smithereens just after it was built. I'll have to trouble Miss Ji to make a trip with me right now and explain the video you obtained to my wife. Jin Wan ignored him. She casually pulled up the information of this investment company on her computer. CEO Jin, who came to terminate the contract previously, was the person in charge of Tianxing Investment Company's finance department. The person before her was the general manager of Tianxing Investment Company. His surname was Xiao, and he was also the legal representative and founder of this company. Jin Wan turned back to look at him. Her tone was gentle and calm. Mr. Xiao, I have no interest in your family matters. The private dealings between you and the previous finance department manager of our studio have nothing to do with me. Supervisor Su committed the crime of embezzlement, which was why I handed her over to the police. I personally handed over all the crimes she committed at work to the police. I don't care if you're here today because CEO Jin found out about your shady dealings and started a fight with you, or if you're here to seek justice for Supervisor Su. None of this should be blamed on our studio. I'm the person in charge here. It's my right to hand over employees who have committed crimes to the police. You're a successful man nearing his 40s. You have a family and a child. Do you need me to teach you such simple logic that even a primary school student would understand? CEO Zhao's expression was extremely displeased. You're a little girl who hasn't even grown up yet. Are you trying to lecture me? Of course not. I'm not the type of person who would waste my breath on unrelated people. Jin Wan coldly curved her lips. To me, it's only Supervisor Su who committed a crime. As for the shady dealings between you and her, since I can find out about it, the police can easily follow the clues and find out as well. Since this matter has passed through the police's hands, it's not strange for your wife to find out about it. So, what's the point of you coming here to act tough? It's not like I allowed you to stay in such an unsafe little hotel. It's not like I was the one who installed illegal cameras. You can't control your lower body and now you're taking your anger out on us? Ji Bian's face seemed to carry a smile, but his eyes were filled with mockery. Don't King talk nonsense with me here. If I were to get a divorce because of this, the company's shares will change. I'll lose at least several hundred million yuan. How can it be resolved with just a few words from you? Just because you have a backer, you dare to be so arrogant. I think you little girl are asking for a lesson. CEO Zhao's expression suddenly turned cold as he gave the thugs a look. The thugs abruptly kicked over the coffee table and spare chairs in the office. They moved forward to drag Jinwan out. Jinwan's brows furrowed. She did not expect these people to be so unreasonable as to act unreasonably in front of her. She stood up and was about to signal the frightened Xiaoba to hurry out and call the police. However, one of the thugs suddenly grabbed Xiaoba's collar and dragged her back. Xiaoba cried out softly. Jinwan's expression changed. She rushed out and was about to help Xiaoba up when the thug suddenly raised his hand to grab Jinwan's hair. Almost at the same time, there was another loud bang from the office door. A figure decisively rushed in. Jinwan had yet to react when Feng Ling, who had abruptly entered, pulled her behind her. Chapter 143. Feng Ling stepped on one of the men's crotch and stomped down harshly. The cries on the ground intensified, causing the office glass to tremble. Jinwan wanted to hold Feng Ling back but was unable to. The short-haired woman's movements were unbelievably nimble. In an instant, CEO Xiao, who was standing by the side in shock, was kicked in the face. He fell to the ground pathetically and half his face turned green. There were two more thugs behind them. Seeing this, they immediately rushed over while cursing. Jinwan's fingers gripped Feng Ling's clothes tightly, worried that someone would die. This time she truly understood how powerful Mo Jingshan was. Right now, she was worried that CEO Zhao's thugs would not be able to leave this place alive. Jinwan resisted the urge to clap and cheer. Her studio had just started. If a murder case were to occur just like that, it would be a huge taboo in doing business. One of the thugs angrily reached over to grab Jinwan's hair and drag her out. The moment his hand approached Jinwan, Feng Ling raised her leg and kicked him. It was as though no matter who the other party was, as long as they dared to touch Jinwan, she would not be polite. Feng Ling directly injured the two men's legs. She could vaguely hear the sound of their kneecaps breaking. Jinwan's back trembled. She then saw that the two men's manhood was about to be destroyed under Feng Ling's feet. Wait, don't kick them. Jinwan rushed to grab Feng Ling's arm. There's a police station near this building. Call the police to come and take them away. There will be people who will teach them a lesson. This country isn't like your overseas training base. Don't kill them. Feng Ling's movements finally paused. Her expression was cold and vicious as she glanced at the trash rolling on the ground. She originally thought that since Jinwan was in the studio and there were security guards in this building, she would be fine as long as she did not go out. She took some time to buy a bottle of water. However, the moment she returned, she heard screams and the sound of things being kicked over. She rushed in to see that Jinwan was almost injured by those people. Feng Ling did not speak. She moved her foot away from the man's manhood and retreated behind Jinwan, maintaining a distance that would not hinder her but ensure her safety. Jinwan helped Xiaoba up. Are you all right? Xiaoba shook her head, looked nervously at the person behind Jinwan, and whispered, Boss, she's amazing. Jinwan smiled. Previously, she had doubted how capable this female bodyguard was. As it turned out, his suspicions were unnecessary. He really shouldn't have. Since she was someone Mo Jingshan had specially selected to be by her side, how could she not be powerful? The police arrived very quickly. When they took the thugs away, President Xiao was also dragged up in a sorry state. Jinwan specially asked the police officer in charge of the previous incident. She confirmed that the video of CEO Xiao and Supervisor Su having an affair outside had been discovered by them after their investigation, and that it was not someone from her studio who had nosily handed over the video on her computer. Only then did she feel reassured. As long as these things really had nothing to do with the people in her studio, she was too lazy to ask again. When President Xiao was brought away, he heard Jinwan's conversation with the police officer. He was slightly vexed, and his expression was difficult to calm down. It was clear that he had already been disturbed at home. A man who originally had good looks and a good family background was beaten black and blue by a female bodyguard in the blink of an eye. Right now he could not even raise his head. He could only glare at Jinwan with indignation. In the end, in the next moment he was held down by the police and brought away. In the evening, Jinwan went to the construction site under the studio's name and returned after an hour. In the car, Jinwan sat in the back row, supporting her head with one hand as she read the documents in her other hand. When she heard her phone ring, she picked it up and listened to the report from the HR department. Right now, she had a good understanding of many industries and market trends in the country. She could also guarantee that in the future the studio would be able to expand. In time, it would definitely become the largest real estate group in the country. However, making money from doing business and managing a business were two different things. Right now, because the studio had received far more investment than expected, the amount of land and real estate she had to purchase would also increase. The studio needed to expand, and the HR department, finance department, and other departments had countless things for her to worry about every day. Jean Wan vainly hoped that in this life, she could stand at the peak of both love and career. However, although she had previously studied in America and had a good degree, she did not have a major in business management or business operation. Even if her brain and foresight were sufficient, she was still somewhat lacking in management. She had only just started and she was already in a terrible mess. These 2 days, Xia Tian had sent her a message saying that she would come to her studio to help after being discharged from the hospital. However, this was still not enough. Jean Wan supported her head with her hand and placed her phone aside. She turned to look at the darkening sky outside the car window. At night in the Yu Garden. With Auntie Chen's dinner, Jean Wan most likely would not have the opportunity to see Mo Jingshan personally cook for a while. On the dining table, Mo Jingshan's chopsticks had just reached over, and Jean Wan's chopsticks accidentally bumped into it. He glanced at her and used his chopsticks to pick up another dish. Jean Wan's chopsticks followed. Like this, the chopsticks fight, for a long time before Mo Jingshan finally put down his chopsticks. His deep, dark eyes stared unblinkingly at Jean Wan, and there seemed to be a faint smile hidden in his eyes. The man's hand was casually placed on the table, and his posture was leisurely. It was a stark contrast to Jean Wan, who seemed to have something on her mind. Something on your mind? His slender fingers picked up the dishes in front of him, placing them in front of Jean Wan in case she could not reach them. Jean Wan finally returned to herself. She raised her head to meet his interested gaze, and when she lowered her head, she saw that almost all of her favorite dishes had been placed in front of her. She directly put down her chopsticks, saying, "Recently, I plan to buy some books on business management and self-study at home. Do you have any good books to recommend?" Mo Jingshan picked up the glass on the table, lowering his head to slowly drink a mouthful of water. Even though he was drinking ordinary water, he still had the elegance and composure of a high-end red wine. Following which, the man unhurriedly said, "It's just an investment of 200 million yuan, and it's already giving you so much pressure? You still want to buy books to self-study business management?" Why did it feel like he was mocking her? Jean Wan picked up her chopsticks again, picking up a mouthful of vegetables and placing it in her mouth to chew. She unhappily said, "Why do I feel like the great Xiao Mo is looking down on me? Only you can turn 50 million yuan into 3 billion yuan in 3 years. Can't I be better than you?" Chapter 144. Jean Wan pursed her lips. "No, I'm only suitable to be your wife. It's fine to be kissed, hugged, and raised up by you. If you were to be my tutor, I'm sure you'd scold me until I develop a fragile heart." The smile on Mo Jingshan's handsome face deepened. He reached out to ladle a bowl of soup for Jean Wan. "How could I possibly scold you?" That's right, he wouldn't scold her. Wasn't using his actions to make her cry from night to day a more brutal punishment? "Eat first. Don't sit there in a daze," Mo Jingshan reminded. Jean Wan picked up the bowl and began eating. She quickly and decisively finished her meal before running upstairs into Mo Jingshan's study to look for books. In the end, after searching for a long time, she could not find the books she wanted to read. Instead, they were mostly famous business cases and books in various languages. The rest were mostly files from the company temporarily placed at home. Unable to find them, Jean Wan gave up on his study. She turned around to leave when she saw the man standing by the study door. The light in the study was not particularly bright. Mixed with the moonlight shining in from the window, it made him appear like a cool breeze and a bright moon. However, he appeared slightly mysterious. "What are you looking for?" He entered and reached out to hold Jean Wan's back, pulling her in front of him. His fingers gently caressed her hair and slender back. His warm breath landed on Jean Wan's cheek, warm and ambiguous. Jean Wan thought in her heart, as expected, she couldn't let Mo Jingshan be her tutor. Otherwise, whenever she looked for him to study, he would flirtatiously throw her onto the bed for a while. It would really affect the progress of her studies. "I thought there would be books on business management in your study. In the end, there isn't a single one. I don't read those things. Of course there aren't any." Thus, some geniuses were born with it. Managing such a large company and still managing it in an orderly manner, When Mo Jingshan took over America's Shine Group in the future, he would most likely be just as skilled or even more skilled. Mo Jingshan's cell phone rang. Jin Wan did not delay him from picking it up. She turned back to his study and brought out a classic English book with business cases to read. When he returned from the call, the man carried her, who was reading on the bed, onto his lap. Jin Wan shifted her gaze away from the book and raised her eyes. "Why are you looking at me? I don't understand the books in other languages in your study. I can only read this book in English." Mo Jingshan glanced at her again and took the book from her hands. He flipped through several pages and stopped halfway through, returning the book to her. "There are a few foreign real estate marketing cases at the back of this page," he said lightly. Jin Wan took a few more serious glances and raised her head to look at his handsome and perfect side profile. She asked in surprise, "The books on the bookshelves are written in at least 7 or 8 languages from different countries. Don't tell me you've read all of them? And you remember the contents of every single book?" He chuckled and calmly hugged her. Having a photographic memory is also an essential instinct for a business manager. No matter when or where, you must have an impression of every detail that concerns the company, big or small, so that you can better judge the situation and make the most perfect analysis and decision. Jin Wan raised the book. "You're going to teach me now. If you can maintain your gentlemanly attitude, I can consider letting you be my tutor." Mo Jingshan held back his laughter, caressing her face. "I've slept with you countless times inside and out. Now you want me to be a gentleman? Lying to myself is not the attitude a business manager should have." She could not win against him. Jin Wan lowered her head to continue reading. Even when night fell, she was still staring at the book on the bed. Mo Jingshan pulled her under the blankets and lightly said, "Grandfather just called. He asked us to return to the Mo family home for a night the day after tomorrow." "Why are you suddenly going back? Is there something?" Mo Jingshan brought Jin Wan into his embrace. "And Shu Yan and her father will be staying at the Mo family home as guests for the next few days. Their flight back to America has already been booked. Although grandfather does not plan on having too much of a relationship with the Yin family, as the head of the Mo family, he still has to be polite. He asked us to go back for a meal as a farewell. Why do I feel that this isn't a request grandfather would make?" Jin Wan raised her head to look at Mo Jingshan's expression. Mo Jingshan rubbed her head. "You saw through it but didn't say it out loud. You're smart. With me around, no matter if it's the Mo family or the Ji family, no one will dare to eat you." Jin Wan bit down on his chin. "It's already good enough that I didn't eat in Shu Yan. Who can eat me? Mo Jingshan bit back on her lips. "I can eat." Jin Wan raised her head to continue biting him. The two of them bit for a long time. Jin Wan's breathing became more hurried. In the end, she hurriedly called for a stop and did not move around under him. Mo Jingshan's hand held her slightly cold feet under the blankets. His brows furrowed slightly. "Your feet are so cold. It's almost mid-autumn. The weather outside is only a few degrees above zero. Every year my hands and feet are always cold at this time." Jin Wan allowed her feet to remain in his palms and did not pull them out. "I heard from the elderly that when your hands and feet are cold, it means that no one is hurting you." Mo Jingshan kissed the corner of her lips. "Haven't I doted on you enough?" Jin Wan had only said it casually, but in the blink of an eye, she was instantly killed by his words. She could not retort back and simply moved her feet in his palms. In an instant they were held by him again. "I won't torment you anymore. Rest early. When you return to the Mo family, go to the back mountain to soak in a hot spring. It'll help with your cold body." His tone was light. Jin Wan's eyes immediately brightened. "The Mo family's back mountain's hot spring? Isn't that a place that doesn't allow outsiders to enter easily?" "You're Mrs. Mo, not an outsider." Mo Jingshan's words landed, using his gaze to warn her to quickly place the book in her hands aside. He softly said, "Sleep." Perhaps because she was used to being dominated by him in bed, Jin Wan immediately obediently placed the book on the bedside table. The next day, Feng Ling drove. Jin Wan sat in the car and browsed through the news on her phone. She suddenly saw the news of Haiqing Tianxing Investment Company being taken down. Even if the police were to interfere, their actions would not have been so fast. Furthermore, with money, even the devil would turn millstones. If CEO Xiao and CEO Jin both wanted to protect the company, they could bear with each other and turn the big problem into a small one. The police would not be able to continue interfering. Now that this company had suddenly been taken down, it was equivalent to closing down overnight. Jin Wan's fingers paused on the screen. She turned to look at Feng Ling, who was driving. Yesterday's matter, did you tell Mo Jingshan? Feng Ling focused on driving while replying, yes. No wonder. Mo Jingshan was really too black-bellied. Last night he did not make a move. In the end, this company actually quietly died in his hands. Chapter 145. The next evening, Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan returned to the Mo home together and saw several cars parked in the front yard. Director Mo had only returned to the country once, but there were already so many cars following him. As the owner of Shine Group, he was indeed extraordinary. Returning to the country, there were countless bodyguards by his side. Even the bodyguards' cars were all luxury cars worth at least 1 million yuan. It was truly an extraordinary extravagance. By the time the two entered the Mo home, because it was approaching mid-autumn, there was already a festive atmosphere in the house. The moment they entered the front hall, they saw Elder Mo and Mo Xiaoza drinking tea and chatting with Father-in. It was as though they were discussing something worth being happy about, and their faces were all filled with smiles. And Shuyan sat by Father An's side. She raised her eyes to see Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan walking in with their fingers intertwined. Seeing this scene, Mo Xiaoza's originally smiling face instantly darkened. He glanced at Father-in, and when Father-in saw Jin Wan, his gaze became more distant and cold. He looked at Jin Wan with a judgmental gaze. Grandfather. Jin Wan greeted Elder Mo as though there was no one around. Her expression was natural, and she was not swayed by those people's gazes. She then calmly looked at Mo Xiaoza, whose expression was not very good. Dad. Mo Xiaoza coldly retracted his gaze and did not even make a sound in response. Jin Wan did not feel awkward. She smiled at Father and Mr. and hello. I'm Jingshan's wife. My name is Jin Wan. After all, Jin Wan's attitude was neither servile nor overbearing. No matter how unhappy Father-in was, he could not show it as obviously as Mo Xiaoza. Furthermore, Elder Mo was sitting by the side with a smile. No need to be polite. Miss Ji, please sit, Father-in replied. And Shuyan also revealed a polite and mild smile. She looked at Jin Wan and then at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan handed the gift box that Jin Wan had bought on the way to the housekeeper, Uncle O, saying, Jin Wan heard that Dad and Uncle An are going back to the United States. She knows that it's hard to drink authentic domestic tea abroad, and she knows that Dad and Uncle An have a hobby of tasting tea for many years, so she specially bought a few boxes of Bai Luo Chun before coming here. There was obvious dissatisfaction on Mo Xiaoza's face, but after all, now was not the time to instigate Jin Wan in private. Seeing that Jin Wan had been so natural and polite since she entered the door, he could not find any fault with her. He frowned slightly and coldly answered, "And leave it." Just as Uncle O was about to take the boxes of tea they brought to the back, Elder Mo suddenly looked back and raised his eyebrows. Is it Dongting Biluakan? This is indeed an authentic good tea that is hard to buy overseas. I haven't drunk Bai Luo Chun in a long time. Quick, brew the tea that Ji last brought, I want to taste it first. Okay, Grandpa, Uncle O answered and left. Ji last, don't just stand there. Why are you still standing in front of your own house? Come and sit with Grandpa. Elder Mo waved to Jin Wan again. Jin Wan walked over with a smile, exchanged a look with Mo Jingshan, and sat down next to Elder Mo. Speaking of which, this is the second time I've seen Miss Ji. At this time, Father-in suddenly spoke, looking at Jin Wan inquiringly. That day at the dinner party of Shine, I didn't have a chance to talk to Miss Ji. I only remember that Jingshan took you upstairs. Was Miss Ji not feeling well at that time? Almost everyone present knew what had happened to Jin Wan that day. Mo Xiaoza, the initiator of the incident, was sitting next to him, but Father-in asked this question. He was clearly deliberately making things difficult for Jin Wan. Jin Wan smiled frankly. That day I accidentally drank too much and fell asleep in the bathroom. If Jingshan hadn't found me, I would have slept in there all night. I was so shameful that day. Mr. N, please don't make fun of me. Elder Mo, on the other hand, laughed by the side. The others naturally could not laugh. Her reply was too magnanimous. It was like a child who had accidentally drunk too much and was sticking out her tongue to beg for forgiveness in front of her elders. However, she avoided being instigated. This caused Father-in to involuntarily narrow his eyes. Mo Jingshan's gaze carried a smile, and his tone was calm as he spoke. The small matters between husband and wife really shouldn't be brought up to the table. She usually doesn't have many opportunities to drink, and her alcohol tolerance is indeed poor. That night, she only drank a few glasses of champagne before finding a place to sleep. It took me a long time to find her. A few glasses of champagne and you're already drunk. Miss G's alcohol tolerance is indeed not good. Father An also smiled, but his smile did not reach his eyes. Mr. An, you really are making fun of me. When I was young, I often took medicine. During those years, I was allergic to alcohol. After I grew up, I was no longer allergic, but my father never allowed me to drink. My temper is a little stubborn. I feel that if others can drink, I can also drink. Thus, I often find opportunities to secretly drink a few glasses, but every time, I'm a complete drunk. She smiled as she spoke. Jingshin is also always controlling me. That night, I secretly hid by the side and drank a few glasses. In the end, I almost made a fool of myself. Jinwan lowered her brows as though she was very embarrassed. These few days, Jingshin has been nagging me quite a bit. In the future, he most likely won't allow me to touch a single drop of alcohol. He's even stricter than my father. Father An's smile faded slightly. His eyes coldly stared at Jinwan, who had been smiling the entire time. He was already somewhat unhappy, but he did not say it out loud. For a man to control his wife like this, to the point that he would constantly watch over such a small matter like drinking, the underlying meaning was that Mo Jingshin really cared about Jinwan. Mo Xiaozi could hear that Jinwan, this clear-headed little lass, was purposely putting Father An in a bad spot. His cold voice abruptly rang out. If your alcohol tolerance isn't good, then don't come out and walk around. After all, you still have the title of Mrs. Mo on your head. If there's a day when you drink a few drops of alcohol in public, you won't only be throwing away your own face. The moment Mo Xiaozi's words came out before anyone else could speak, Elder Mo immediately glared at him. What are you talking about? That G-brat, no matter if she's at home or outside, no one can find any fault with her actions. Mo Xiaozi's sharp gaze turned cold. In front of everyone, being carried back to the room by Jing Shen in front of everyone, isn't that embarrassing enough? In front of so many people, just whose actions are the most unpresentable. Mo Jingshin calmly spoke. His voice was cold. Do you really want to say it out loud here? Although Mo Jingshin's voice was clearly no different from his usual tone, everyone present could acutely sense the hidden undercurrent within. They only needed to be distracted for a moment, and it was as though they would be frozen into ice by his silent, biting coldness. Chapter 146. Mo Jingshin's eyes were dark. His thin lips curved up, but his smile was cold. It's exactly what the words mean. After exposing everything under the thin paper in front of everyone, Mo Xiaozi's expression could no longer maintain his composure. His expression was enraged. The father and son exchanged glances. In an instant, the hall became as cold as an icehouse. And Shu Yin, who sat by Father An's side, did not speak. She raised her eyes to see Mo Jingshin sitting there. Although his expression was cold, he still maintained the position of holding Jinwan's 10 fingers. His 2 long legs wrapped in his suit pants were lazily crossed. His entire person appeared calm and casual, but his brows carried a viciousness that surpassed this hypocritical calmness. The matter of Jinwan being locked in the restroom that day, he did not plan on letting it go so peacefully. This topic should not have been brought up in the first place. If they really brought it up, the one who would suffer in the end would not be Jinwan, who had been pressured by them. Just as Mo Xiaozi was about to open his mouth in anger, and Shu Yin warmly suggested, "Grandfather Mo, I heard that the back mountain of the Mo family has a spring that was dug out 100 years ago. It's connected to Hai Cheng's dragon vein and is a natural 4-colored hot spring that is rarely seen in the country. Before returning to America, would Shu Yin have the luck to soak in this legendary Mo family hot spring?" It was clear that Shu Yin was trying to change the topic and pause this scene of colliding icebergs. Mo Xiaozi unhappily glanced at Jinwan. However, Jinwan only smiled at him. Unlike the sharp words she used in front of the hotel that day, in front of outsiders, she still had her own sense of propriety. Although this young girl appeared to be relying on Mo Jingshin's presence to protect her, her mind was clear and she knew how to cooperate with Mo Jingshin. Every word, action was perfectly coordinated. At this moment, Elder Mo was already smiling at Shu Yin. "Aya, it's just a private hot spring at home. It's not as amazing as you say. Grandfather Mo, you're too humble. The Mo family's hot spring has always been famous in the country." And Shu Yin followed the elder's good mood and continued, "I heard that frequently soaking in the Mo family's 4-colored hot spring can cure 100 illnesses. It's all because it's been exaggerated by outsiders. The so-called 4 colors hot spring is actually the result of the Chinese medicine developed by the Mo family over the last few decades." As Elder Mo spoke, he stood up. "It just so happens that there are quite a few small hot springs on the other side of the hot spring. It's more suitable for you ladies to go together. Since Shu Yan wants to go take a look, then let's all go soak in it today. As he spoke, Elder Mo continued, Jing Shina, bring the Ji brat along. It's good for the body to soak in the hot spring often. Right now, the Ji brat is burdened with the mission of letting me carry my great-grandson as soon as possible. We can't miss out on something like this. Old Master Sheng's words were really well thought out, completely cutting off Shu Yan's last chance to perform. He was truly protecting Jin Wan. Father and did not know how to express his thoughts. And Shu Yan continued to smile gracefully, but her gaze occasionally shifted toward Mo Jingshan's position. The Mo family's hot spring was indeed different from the various high-grade and low-grade hot springs outside. It was located in the back mountain of the Mo family's home and was meticulously built in an antique-style cave. Although under Elder Mo's warm invitation, there were many people who came to soak in the hot spring together. Thankfully, the Four Colors hot spring was located in the center, and there were several small springs and hot springs that were blocked off. It was convenient for Shu Yan and Jin Wan. After all, the elder and the others were men. It was not a big deal for them to chat and soak in the Four Colors hot spring. However, Shu Yan and Jin Wan were women. Even if they were both wearing clothes, it was still not very appropriate. Jin Wan was arranged to stay in the innermost medicinal spring. When she passed by the rose spring behind a stone door, she saw that Shu Yan had already been brought in by the Mo family's helper. The medicinal spring was located in the innermost part of the hot spring cave. It was very secluded. When Jin Wan sat in the hot spring, she felt slightly hot. After slowly adjusting to the temperature, her face began to sweat. She felt very comfortable and slowly stretched her body to lean against the spring. Her hair was tied up high, and her exposed neck and face were gradually covered in sweat due to the temperature of the water. After soaking like this for about 20 minutes, Jin Wan was so comfortable that she almost fell asleep. All of a sudden, there seemed to be someone approaching from behind, but there was no particularly big movement. She abruptly returned to her senses and turned back to see Mo Jingshan walking in with the medicinal fragrance of the Four Colors hot spring. Jin Wan was startled. Why aren't you continuing to stay with grandfather and the others? I can't possibly leave you here alone. It's easy to fall asleep after soaking in the hot spring for too long. I'm here to take a look. Mo Jingshan said he was only here to take a look, but he had already unhurriedly walked in. As he entered the pool of hot spring in front of her, the water surface rippled slightly. Jin Wan originally sat in the hot spring without moving. The man's arm reached out from the water and directly pulled her over, asking, "How do you feel?" "It's all right. It's just a little hot." Mo Jingshan smiled, holding her and sitting with her for a while. He lowered his eyes to see that her little face was slightly red from the heat of the water and was about to kiss her on the cheek. All of a sudden, there seemed to be someone approaching from outside. Jin Wan heard the sound. Afraid that someone would see her, she rushed to push him away. However, the man tightened his grip around her waist. At the same time, he turned back, calmly watching Shu Yan, who had suddenly walked in. Shu Yan clearly did not expect to see Mo Jingshan here, nor did she expect to see the two of them in the hot spring, hugging each other. The moment she walked in and saw such a scene, her first reaction was not to leave immediately. Instead, she stood there as though she had not returned to her senses for a while. "Sorry." 10 seconds later, she forced herself to return to her senses. She looked at them. "Mo, earlier on, I was a little bored at the Rose Spring and wanted to come over to chat with Mrs. Mo. I didn't expect." Mo Jingshan's tone was mild. "There's nothing to apologize for. But if you and Jin Wan are in the same hot spring, it will only be more boring." Shu Yan's expression faltered. Jin Wan also subtly glanced at Shu Yan. The meaning behind Mo Jingshan's words was to mock Shu Yan for running over to chat with Jin Wan. In the end, it would only result in the two women sitting together awkwardly finding topics to talk about. Thus, it was true that there was no need for her to come and chat with Jin Wan. Even if they did chat, there would not be any good things to talk about. This man hid a poisonous tongue behind his composure. He was truly magnanimous and heartless. From start to finish, Mo Jingshan did not seem to have crossed the line with Shu Yan in any way that he should not have. Even at the Shine Group's banquet, he was still cold and warm, maintaining a seal of alienation and indifference. Chapter 147. My apologies for disturbing you. Although Shu Yan had suffered a blow, she maintained a polite smile on her face. She took one last deep look at the man in the same hot spring as Jin Wan before abruptly turning to leave. Only when Shu Yan's footsteps were far away did Jin Wan place her chin on Mo Jingshan's shoulder. Secretarian is actually quite good at enduring. Based on her IQ and EQ, she may be able to endure failure and grievances. However, it's clear that you've hurt her pride. For a proud woman, pride is her true bottom line. Because at that moment, Jinwan saw an unbearable suppression appear in Shuyen's eyes. Perhaps no matter how much she heard about Jinwan and Mo Jingshan's love, it was not as much of a blow as seeing the two of them being so intimate in the hot spring. Mo Jingshan pushed aside her wet hair that was stuck to his neck. The warm water fell from his palm onto her collarbone. Jinwan turned to look at the man's face that was inches from hers. Mo Jingshan's tone was calm. Do you wish for me to care more about her pride or your feelings? Jinwan raised her brows, biting down on his shoulder. Why did you throw this suicidal question back at me? One is a woman who has nothing to do with me, and that little bit of pride that has nothing to do with me. The other is the wife I've set my heart on, the woman who will accompany me for the rest of my life. This is a very clear line between heaven and earth. She's the one who can't see it clearly. Mo Jingshan rubbed her ears, his voice low and gentle. You also know that this is a suicidal question. The correct answer is right there, yet you insist on me giving you a reason to satisfy your curiosity. Jinwan raised her lips, no longer biting him. Instead, she planted a kiss on his chin. It seems like I should stamp the #1 husband in history. Stamping is fine, but kissing is too simple. It's ineffective. The man held her waist under the water, planting a kiss on her lips. When we return to the room, stamp it properly. You can stamp it however you want. Don't mess around. This is the Mo family. It's more important to spend time with grandfather tonight. Jinwan was serious. Mo Jingshan's tone was also very serious. It's also important to accompany your husband to sleep. After soaking for too long, he planned to leave the hot spring pool and return to his room to rest. Jinwan stayed inside to change her clothes. When Mo Jingshan stepped out of the small hot spring, and Shuyen was still wearing the hot spring outfit. Her long hair fell behind her. Hearing the movement, she turned back to look at Mo Jingshan. President Mo, and Shuyen stared at his handsome face. Even though he had just come out from the hot spring, it was still elegant and warm. This is the Mo family after all. We are guests here. Thankfully, the person who entered earlier was me. If it was Uncle Mo or my father who saw this, who knows what they would think of Jinwan. And Shuyen's meaning was clear. She was hinting that Jinwan was here seducing Mo Jingshan. If the two of them were to be intimate here, it was equivalent to not placing Father and Father Mo in their eyes. She almost blurted out the words immoral. Normally, a husband and wife would occasionally be intimate. I didn't expect it to be an eyesore to miss, and Jinwan had already changed her clothes and walked out. Without waiting for the cold and indifferent Mo Jingshan to speak, she walked over with a light smile. Miss An has a family background that causes others to shrink back, as well as an astute and intelligent upbringing. You must have your eyes on the top of your head. However, this sort of sanctimonious judgment shouldn't be placed on us. Jinwan approached Mo Jingshan's side and glanced at Shuyen. We're legally married. Don't mention that we only kissed and hugged earlier. Even if we really did something uncontrollable, I'm afraid it wouldn't have anything to do with offending public morals. And Shuyen originally wanted to use this opportunity to speak to Mo Jingshan alone. However, she did not expect Jinwan to walk out so quickly and in such a timely manner. This extremely taboo phrase of uncontrollable was, of course, something that only Jinwan and Mo Jingshan could do. And Shuyen was silent for a moment before smiling slightly. I've interacted with Mrs. Mo several times, but I still don't know you very well. I'll be leaving tomorrow. Are you sure you want to leave such an impression on me, Mrs. Mo? Jinwan really wanted to laugh. It seemed like this, and Shuyen was really poisoned by Mo Jingshan. What she could not obtain was always the best. Even if she returned to America, he would forever be the evergreen tree and white moonlight in her heart. She would not allow any other woman to taint him. Missin, you should know what kind of person I am. From the first time you met me in the company, you've already thoroughly investigated my trump card. Furthermore, is the impression I leave on you that important? Jinwan raised her brows and chuckled lightly. Missin, it's fine to be conceited, but don't be too arrogant and think too highly of yourself. Mo Jingshan coldly spoke. To Jinwan, the Mo family is her own home. How she acts at home is her freedom. There's no need to hide it. And Shuyen looked at him and suddenly chuckled. I thought your feelings for Jinwan were only due to the responsibility of marriage and a momentary passion. After all, for someone like you who is always calm and rational when it comes to marriage and feelings, you will definitely consider the benefits of all aspects. I didn't expect you to be so serious about her. Mo Jingshan did not speak. His gaze remained indifferent. And Shuyan raised her head and looked at him. A person who stands too high is not suitable to give all of his feelings. You're so rational, yet you're willing to live such a life? Mo Jingshan did not plan to continue speaking with her. He held onto Jin Wan's hand and walked out. And Shuyan abruptly asked just as he was about to brush past them, "Do you think that you'll be together with her for the rest of your life?" "I will." Mo Jingshan turned and looked at her seriously. His tone was calm and not abrupt, but it heavily struck Jin Wan's heart. "Are you so sure that you won't divorce her?" "I'm sure." He did not have the slightest bit of hesitation. His tone was unreasonably calm, but it was as though he was speaking of something that could not be more natural. The embarrassment on Shuyan's face could no longer be concealed. When she looked at him, her gaze was very deep. In the end, she abruptly turned and quickly walked away from their eyes. Her footsteps were slightly panicked. It was as though the conversation earlier did not affect Mo Jingshan at all. After Shuyan walked far away, he held onto Jin Wan's hand and took long strides, walking out. They had not walked far when Jin Wan's heart stirred. She did not even know what she was thinking. She suddenly used the strength of his hand to quickly approach him, hugging him from behind. Mo Jingshan paused. He turned back to hug her. "What's wrong?" Jin Wan raised her head in his embrace. "We'll be together for the rest of our lives without divorcing. Right now I still have some looks to look at. When I'm old and withered, are you sure you won't be tired of me?" Mo Jingshan raised his brows. "When you're old and withered, I'll only be older than you." Chapter 148. "And even if it's tofu, this flower of mine will only be planted on you." Seeing that Jin Wan was choked to the point of glaring at him, Mo Jingshan suddenly flicked her head. "What are you thinking about? Don't be so dirty." He was clearly the dirtiest. "It's about time. It's too stuffy here. Let's go out first." Mo Jingshan turned around. At this moment, the sound of Mo Xiaoza and Elder Mo's conversation could be heard from afar, accompanied by the sound of footsteps approaching. "Where's Jingshan?" After chatting for a while at the four-colored hot spring, he suddenly disappeared. "He still hasn't returned." It was Mo Xiaoza's icy voice. Elder Mo calmly replied, "Jingshan never liked to soak in the hot spring when he was young. He probably already left." "Don't tell me he went in to look for Jin Wan? The Yin family is still here, yet that Jin Wan dares to bother Jingshan. Just how disrespectful is she?" Mo Xiaoza said as he walked over. His tone was clearly unhappy. When Jin Wan heard this, she subconsciously pushed Mo Jingshan into a crack in the corner of the cave. The space here was very small and could only fit 2 people. They had to stick close to each other to stand steadily. Her entire body leaned against him. When Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes to glance at her, she raised her hand to make a shu expression. Mo Jingshan did not plan to dodge at all. However, seeing this little woman's expression was too vivid, he allowed her to press him against the crack of the rock. He held her waist to prevent her waist from being hit by the edge of the rock. "Right now we can't be sure if Jingshan has already left. Jin Wan probably isn't inside. Why are you still walking in?" Elder Mo nagged as he walked. "Besides, the reason why the young couple likes to stick together is because their relationship is good. You can't shake their feelings, yet you insist on forcefully interfering. Just what part of Jin Wan is it that you don't like?" "I've always found this granddaughter-in-law to be very pleasing to the eye." Mo Xiaoza harumphed. "Just based on the fact that the Ji family behind her can't compare to the Yin family, she's not qualified." "Based on what you're saying, doesn't Jingshan need to marry a foreign princess to be qualified?" "Princess? Even if you have status but no brains, you're still trash. You've really deified Shuyan too much. From what I see, all young ladies who are caught up in the conflict of love are all the same. Not many of them are rational. I don't think she's as perfect as you say she is. The human heart is more or less still greedy, it's just that some people hide it too well." Elder Mo harumphed. The old man and Mo Xiaoza had already approached. Their words were right beside their ears, separated by a stone wall behind the crack. Just as Mo Xiaoza was about to walk past them, Jin Wan instinctively shrank back, clearly squeezing Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan lowered his gaze to look at her vexed expression. Earlier she had clearly wanted to hide, but now that she knew she couldn't, he smiled and glanced at her teasingly. The old man was walking in front. His eyes swept over the stone crevice. His gaze paused and the walking stick in his hand suddenly fell to the ground, rolling 2 meters backward. Why did my hand suddenly slip?" The old man spoke and turned around. "I think Jingshan and Jin Wan have already left. Stop looking, let's hurry out." Chapter 149. Elder Mo, who had just received the walking stick, suddenly sat on the ground with a putong sound. The walking stick also rolled several meters back. He scolded with a resentful expression. "Your old man is already so old. After soaking in the hot spring for so long, my feet are already numb. I don't have any strength in my hands. Why are you looking for trouble for no reason? The more we walk in, the more stuffy it gets. Hurry and help me out." Seeing that the elder had already fallen to the ground, his acting was really too serious. Mo Xiao's expression was ugly. Even though he knew what was going on, he couldn't go any further. With a dark face, he picked up his walking stick and helped the old man, who was purposely groaning in pain, out. Only after the two of them had walked far away did Jinwan finally relax and lean against Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan sighed with a smile. "Why are you hiding? Do you think he won't know if you hide here?" "He definitely knows. It's so obvious. It would be strange if he doesn't know. But it's still better than being caught on the spot, isn't it? Isn't this the same as avoiding his supercilious glare?" Jinwan carefully poked her head out. After confirming that they had really left, she sighed. "I didn't expect grandfather to be so good at acting. I also didn't expect you to be so good at hiding. Hiding in a place like this." Mo Jingshan brought her out from the crack in the rock. His words were clearly mocking the fact that the crack in the rock could not hide them at all. Jinwan retorted, "Isn't it exciting?" The man's eyes were fixed on her as he smiled. All right, let's hurry out. Otherwise, if Director Mo comes back later, it would be a waste of grandfather's Oscar-winning acting skills." Jinwan spoke as she held his arm and walked out. At the entrance of the hot spring in the back mountain of the Mo family, Mo Xiaoheng supported Elder Mo out. Seeing Shuyan standing outside, he directly asked, "Shuyan, how long have you been out? Have you seen Jingshan?" And Shuyan's gaze was unmoved. She only glanced mildly at the entrance of the hot spring. Her mouth said, "I haven't seen him." Mo Xiaoza did not miss the glance she had cast earlier. His sharp brows furrowed. Due to the elder's incessant "io" cries of pain, he could not go back to grab them. He could only support the elder and leave with a livid expression. Even when Mo Jingshan and Jinwan came out, and Shuyan still stood in the same spot. Jinwan's gaze landed on Shuyan. And Shuyan only curved her lips indifferently at her before turning to look at Mo Jingshan. Mo Jingshan calmly asked, "What time is the flight tomorrow?" And Shuyan's expression was no longer as obvious as it had been in the cave. She replied, "It's very early. I'll probably have to leave for the airport at dawn." Mo Jingshan nodded lightly. His hand was still around Jinwan's waist, and he took her away without saying anything more. Comma, was lit. Regardless of whether it was her past or past life, Jinwan had never walked on such a quiet path with Mo Jingshan. At this moment, the weariness and loneliness from her past life, as well as the pressure from Father Mo, seemed to have disappeared. The sound of the wind brushed past her ears. Jinwan suddenly held Mo Jingshan's hand tightly. The man sensed a slight change in her. His footsteps paused, lowering his eyes to glance at her. At the same time, Jinwan raised her eyes to smile at him. The little woman's smile curved her eyes. Mo Jingshan looked at her. "What's wrong?" Jinwan shook her head mysteriously. Women were often emotional creatures. No matter how many lives they had lived, they were no exception. She was only thinking about what he had said earlier. They would be together for the rest of their lives. There would be no divorce. Jinwan tightened her grip on his hand. It was late at night. After all, she had soaked in a hot spring with Chinese medicine. Although it was good for the body, it was normal to feel thirsty. Jinwan was still awake at 11 o'clock. Mo Jingshan was lying by her side, leaning against the headboard. He was reading an email on his phone. Jinwan did not disturb him. She lifted the blanket and got off the bed. She only said, "I'll get someone to boil some hot water for us to drink." She then put on a coat over her pajamas and left the room with light footsteps. She was not particularly familiar with the Mo family home. Originally, there should be a helper downstairs who would occasionally come by to see if they needed anything. However, when Jinwan went downstairs, the helper was not around. Jinwan walked out. From afar, she saw that the lights in the front hall were still on. She guessed that the helper would be there and walked over. However, when she entered the front hall, she did not see any helper. She only saw Mo Xiaoza sitting on the sofa with an unpleasant expression. His brows were slightly furrowed. Jinwan saw that his complexion was very bad. It seemed like he was not feeling well. Although she did not want to receive his cold gaze, she still walked over. Mo Xiaozi heard Jinwan's voice and turned to look at her coldly. Why are you here? I wanted to get a helper to boil some water, but I couldn't find anyone. I saw that the lights were on, so I came over. Jinwan approached. Where are you feeling unwell? Mo Xiaozi impatiently furrowed his brows and raised his hand to press his forehead. His tone was neither cold nor warm as he said, I'm getting old and can't stand the hot environment. I soaked in the hot spring for too long and had a headache for the entire night. Jinwan turned back to look at the surroundings. She still did not see any helpers and asked, Are you the only one here? Didn't you get someone to bring medicine over? Is the pain very serious? Do you need to see a doctor? It's an old problem. There's no need to take medicine. Mo Xiaozi placed his hand down and glanced at her with an unkind expression. You don't have to pretend with me. If you want to drink water, go find it somewhere else. Don't stand here and make people sick of you. If not for the fact that he was Mo Jingshan's father, with Jinwan's explosive temper, she would not have tolerated him like this. She would have long lashed out at him, all right? If your headache is so bad that you can't sleep, why don't I try to help you massage it? Jinwan's tone was unhurried. Her calmness carried some patience and politeness toward an elder. Mo Xiaozi's eyelids twitched, coldly snorting. You know how to massage? I'll give it a try. Jinwan did not say more. She walked around the sofa and stood behind him. Without waiting for Mo Xiaozi to coldly reject her, her fingers had already gently pressed against his head. She found the acupuncture point on his head and slowly increased her strength. Mo Xiaozi was silent for a moment. He did not say more, nor did he ask her to scram. He only sat there coldly. A moment later, he narrowed his eyes and said, You know how to do this? My dad often has headaches, so I've learned a little. It's just that I've never had the chance to help him. Chapter 150. Jinwan smiled faintly. How can I stop what others say? I admit that my personality has been spoiled by my father, but that doesn't mean I don't have any redeeming qualities. You've always been at the top. You should understand that in the upper-class circle, others only see the glory on your body. If they find any black marks, they will magnify them and spread them out. They can't wait to tear off your glory and step into the ground. Who would care about your true nature? Mo Xiaozi closed his eyes and allowed Jinwan to continue massaging his head. He was silent for a while and did not speak. After massaging for more than 10 minutes, although Jinwan's hands were sore, she maintained her previous strength. Although she was not a professional, the acupuncture points on his head were easy to find. She pressed them all accurately. Earlier at the hot spring, you and Jingshan were both inside, Mo Xiaozi suddenly said. His tone was cold and heavy. Jinwan did not stop massaging his head. She calmly replied, Yes. You sure answered quickly. Back then weren't you still hiding? He coldly reprimanded. I knew you would find out and I didn't mean to offend you. I just subconsciously didn't want to have any conflict with you, so I hid. Jinwan took the opportunity when his attitude was not so distant to say, You should be able to tell that my marriage with Jingshan is very harmonious. Our relationship is also very good. Today at the hot spring in the back mountain, we were indeed together the entire time. But isn't this only natural? Who gave you the courage to say the words only natural, to me? I didn't agree. What do you mean by, only natural? Mo Xiaozi still did not lower his face and his tone was not pleasant. I know you have your own views. And Shuyan and I are indeed not the same kind of people. She is used to her strict and planned life, while I am a very casual person. I do what I should do and say what I should say. Although I live a simple life, it doesn't mean I am blind and stupid. Jinwan smiled and gradually put down her hand. She gently pressed one side and said, And Shuyan and I are not the same kind of people. It's useless no matter how you put it. Jingshan also has a strict and planned life. Since young, he has been the Mo family's most favored successor. Mo Xiaozi coldly snorted. Jinwan curved her lips. You've never truly compared me to Shuyan. You only firmly believe that she and Jingshan belong to the same world. Isn't this something that everyone can see? In what way can you compare to Shuyan? Although his head was indeed much more relaxed after being pressed by her, Mo Xiaozi seemed to be at loggerheads with her. Using Shuyan's merits to compare with the so-called Jinwan you heard from others, is this fair? Jinwan's attitude was calm, and there was a smile in her eyes. Her tone remained indifferent and quiet. Indeed, it is very unfair. A clear voice came from the back door of the front hall. Jinwan looked back and saw that Mo Jingshan had come out. She didn't know how long he had been standing there watching and listening. Hearing Mo Jingshan's movements, Mo Xiaoza abruptly turned around. Mo Jingshan was only wearing soft and comfortable home clothes. Although he did not look as strict and noble as he usually did, his casual appearance was closer to the so-called simplicity that Jinwan had mentioned. It was clear that he had discovered that Jinwan had not returned. He did not even put on a jacket and directly went downstairs to look for Jinwan. At the end of the day, in the end, don't you still have to rely on Jingshan to support you? The moment Mo Xiaoza saw Mo Jingshan, it was as though his supreme authority had been thoroughly challenged. His expression turned cold once more. Mo Jingshan slowly walked in, speaking indifferently, "From start to finish, I've always been the one to protect her. I'm unwilling to see her suffer too much. I'm her husband. Isn't it only right for me to support her? For this woman, I've asked you to return to America to take over Shine several times, but you never agreed. What future can you have if you stay in Haicheng and guard your own Mo corporation? The Mo family's foundation is all in Shine. Your future also belongs to Shine." Mo Xiaoza appeared to be angered by Mo Jingshan's indifferent attitude and angrily rebuked him. Mo Jingshan did not respond. His gaze was indifferent. What kind of attitude is this? Is this the attitude you should have toward a father? Even now, I still don't understand the reason why you suddenly left America. After returning to the country, you established your own business because of your own ability. If you have the ability, I won't say anything. But you suddenly married Jinwan, and you didn't even tell me. Do you even have any respect for your father? The moment Mo Xiaoza met Mo Jingshan's indifferent expression, he angrily scolded while picking up the teacup on the coffee table opposite the sofa. He abruptly smashed it heavily toward Mo Jingshan. Jinwan almost instinctively ran over and decisively moved forward to block Mo Jingshan. The swiftly flying teacup smashed harshly against her thigh. Mo Xiaoza had really thrown the teacup with all his strength. This time the pain caused Jinwan's entire leg to go numb. To throw it so harshly, he really could be so ruthless toward his own son. Mo Jingshan originally did not dodge. Jinwan's charge was too sudden, and the teacup was smashed over in the blink of an eye. He abruptly tugged Jinwan aside, glancing at her with furrowed brows before looking at her leg. Jinwan was only smashed once and did not feel much. She endured the pain and raised her head to look at him. She shook her head and softly said, it's all right. You sure have the courage to block." Mo Xiaoza narrowed his eyes and harumphed coldly. Mo Jingshan's ink-black eyes were like a boundless night that had been baptized by a tornado. He glanced at Mo Xiaoza, his handsome face clear and cold. He directly pulled Jinwan behind him, his low and heavy voice mild and indifferent. "Don't you know why I left America?" Mo Xiaoza coldly met his gaze. It was clear that his anger was unquenchable, yet he was suppressing his temper. "Aside from in Shuyan, have you ever put in any less effort by my side? Back then, when I was recovering from my heavy injuries in Los Angeles, what did you do?" Mo Jingshan's tone was low and cold. Right now, his eyes were filled with a coldness that Jinwan had never seen before. Mo Jingshan was in Los Angeles. Heavily injured. Los Angeles? She had been to this place before. When she was studying in America, the city she stayed the longest in was Los Angeles. A blurry memory seemed to flash past her mind, but she did not manage to grasp it. Mo Xiaoza's sudden angry words drew all of her attention away. "What does that matter have to do with you staying in High City?" Mo Xiaoza angrily asked. However, the moment he finished speaking, Mo Xiaoza's figure suddenly paused. His gaze abruptly shifted toward Jinwan, who was shielded behind Mo Jingshan. He coldly stared at her for a long time before suddenly narrowing his eyes as though he had thought of something. He coldly asked, "It's her?" Jinwan's eyelids instantly twitched. What was her? Chapter 151. Mo Jingshan's expression remained cold as he slowly spoke. "I don't need anyone to tell me what to do in my life, even if it's my biological father." Mo Xiaoza glared at him, but his gaze shifted to Jinwan, who he had been protecting behind him. He suddenly furrowed his brows, narrowed his eyes and coldly said, "You've hardened your heart to go against me." Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear him. He turned back to look at Jinwan, gently caressing her leg. "Does it still hurt?" Of course it hurt. Right now it was most likely bruised. But with her pajamas covering it, no one could see it. Jinwan's expression did not change. "It's all right. It's already been so long. It doesn't hurt anymore. It's just a blow to my leg. Don't worry. It's my negligence." Mo Jingshan held her hand, gently caressing her fingers. "This kind of thing will never happen again. What Jinwan cared about was not whether her leg hurt or not, but that she could sense the hostility between the father and son. This man Mo Jingshan was really too good at hiding his emotions. It was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. She actually only realized the huge problem between them now. That. Jinwan abruptly raised her head to say, the Ji family's foundation is indeed not as solid as Miss An's family, but it's still a reputable figure in Haicheng. If it's just because of the difference in status, I can work hard to make up for it. The Mo family doesn't lack things like money and power. Isn't it my ability that you want to see? Mo Xiaoza glanced at her, coldly saying, at least you have some self-awareness. I know you bought 2 companies from someone else and even merged them into some studio. Let's not talk about whether Jing Shin has invested in your studio. Let's talk about yourself. Even with such good resources, I don't see you earning a single cent. What right do you have to stand here and talk to me? Hearing these words, Jinwan smiled. The property industry had already stagnated this year. There was still a period of time to observe the market. She chose to wait and accumulate. If she did not hold it in now, how could she possibly double her capital in the future? But hearing Mo Xiaoza's words, it could be said that he had pointed out a bright path for her. She didn't know if it was because her attitude just now was commendable that Mo Xiaoza's attitude was no longer as stubborn as before. It sounds like you've already made plans. It's also a rare honor for me to grow step by step under the witness of the chairman of Shine Group, Jinwan said. Mo Xiaoza narrowed his eyes and glanced at her fearless gaze. Do you know how much liquidity Shine Corporation has every minute? It's $10 million. Mo Xiaoza said coldly, it's almost equivalent to 70 million renminbi. I'll give you a week, can you earn it? Jinwan pressed Mo Jingshan's raised hand hard and replied generously, all right, if I can't make it in a week, don't kick me out. I'll sign the divorce agreement and send it to you in America. Jinwan? Mo Jingshan abruptly spoke up coldly. Jinwan turned to look at him, smiling at him. I can't. Trust me. Mo Jingshan stared at her, his gaze quiet and heavy. Without a word, he brought her out of the living room. Mo Xiaoza stood in the living room, coldly narrowing his eyes. 70 million in a week, this sort of condition was too simple. He had only said a few words of mockery, but Jinwan had strangely tied a dead knot on this 70 million. Realizing that for a moment earlier Jinwan had purposely led him into a trap, Mo Xiaoza's originally ugly expression became even worse. Jinwan was brought out by Mo Jingshan. The moment they stepped out of the living room, Jinwan said, don't worry about me. It's only 70 million. Not asking him to give me a price tag of 700 million is already the best outcome for me. Mo Jingshan looked at her and was silent for several seconds before saying, the 300,000 square meters of empty land near Shimin Square can be sold. Jinwan, how did he know that she had this intention from the start? The man did not look at the astonishment in her eyes. He calmly said, the properties and land under your studio's name are all close to the city's planned public square. There are business opportunities everywhere. You've always been passionate about your studio, and your mind is clear. You know how to prepare well. Why would I worry? Seeing that her gaze was still slightly dazed, Mo Jingshan only caressed her hair. His tone was gentle and low. That piece of land was purchased by Han Tianyuan for 200 million a year ago. Right now it's under your studio's name. In the past year there hasn't been any opportunity to raise the price. Many people thought that this piece of land had fallen into their hands and was destined to lose money. Jinwan raised her head from the man's face. You even know about such things. Is there anything about me that you don't know? Mo Jingshan raised her chin, his black eyes fixated on hers. His tone was casual and casual. I'm also thinking, is there anything about you that I don't know? Jinwan felt a chill run down her spine from his gaze. Everything from her past life was still vivid in her mind. She raised her hand to touch her ear, avoiding his piercing gaze. Towards Mo Xiaoza's conditions, Jinwan gladly accepted them. After all, it was one thing to be protected by Mo Jingshan and the elder, but it was another thing to have a chance to speak up in front of Mo Xiaoza. That's right. That piece of land had always been looked down upon. Back then it was still in Han Tianyuan's hands. Because of that piece of land he had a huge debt with the bank. Even now the unsettled debt was still attached to her studio. Jinwan kept delaying it, so everyone thought that she was unable to sell it. Do you know about the city plan that the city government has yet to release? Jinwan asked. Mo Jingshan curved his lips. His smile was indifferent. I know. This isn't strange. The Mo Corporation has an inseparable relationship with Haicheng's business and political circles. But this city plan that had yet to be released, Jinwan also knew that this was not logical. Mo Jingshan did not ask. He only looked at her. Jinwan averted her eyes, saying seriously, "The square will be rebuilt. The city hall's main building will also be moved there. All the land and buildings nearby will skyrocket overnight." Thus, Jinwan had calculated clearly that within a week she would be able to earn it all back. This was also within her original plan. While not disrupting her plans, she could also take the opportunity to bargain with Mo Xiaozi. Could be considered killing two birds with one stone. Seeing the faint flicker of light in her eyes, Mo Jingshan looked at her and said, "Come here." Chapter 152. Mo Jingshan could tell that she was relaxed and confident. He held her waist and pulled her into his embrace. His words were low and carried a hint of warning. "In the future, no matter what happens, don't run in front of me to block me. Remember this, do you hear me?" Jinwan smiled. In that situation, even if it was a knife, she would still rush over instinctively, much less a teacup. Mo Jingshan brought her back to the room and had the helper bring over some medicinal wine. He then had her sit by the bed and personally helped her massage the fist-sized bruise on her thigh. Jinwan looked at him, asking, "Have you lived in Los Angeles for a long time?" Mo Jingshan's hand paused on her thigh for a moment, but it was only for the blink of an eye. He then continued to pour out the yellowing medicinal wine to massage her thigh. "When I was studying in America, I lived in Los Angeles. I stayed there for about 2 to 3 years. Jinwan stared at him. "Have we met?" Mo Jingshan stood up, closing the bottle of medicinal wine and casually placing it by the side. He turned back to look at her. "What do you think?" she said. The things that happened in America back then, her memories were really blurry. After all, so many years had passed in her previous life. How could she have the mood to recall her teenage years? Now that she thought about it, she could not remember when she had met Mo Jingshan. A man like him would leave a deep impression on any woman with a single glance. Even though Jinwan had grown up in the upper class and was used to seeing all kinds of outstanding men, if she had met Mo Jingshan before, she would definitely not forget him. "I don't think so," Jinwan muttered to herself. Mo Jingshan watched her, his gaze dark and deep. At the same time, in the Ji family's villa. It was already late at night. Ji Mingran's room was still brightly lit, but the atmosphere was stifling. Earlier she had called in Shu Yan. However, and Shu Yan's tone was cold. "Second Miss Ji, you don't have to vainly hope to obtain any benefits from me. The relationship between us has never been one of cooperation. In the future, don't call me again." After that, the call was hung up. Originally, she wanted to use Shu Yan as a sharp blade to successfully push Jinwan away from Mo Jingshan's side. However, she did not expect that Shu Yan would return to America so soon. The reason she called her was to find out the current situation between Mo Jingshan and Jinwan. In the end, she heard such words that kept her 1,000 miles away. Clearly, this Shu Yan was the same as her, wishing for Jinwan to immediately disappear from this world. Yet, she insisted on pretending to be insufferably arrogant. Who was she showing her arrogance to? Returning to the United States was tantamount to retreating in defeat. As a loser, he pretended to be very virtuous. What surprised her even more was that Mo Jingshan's father's intervention failed to shake Jinwan's status as Mrs. Mo. If Jinwan was more suspicious, or if she was still as spoiled as before, she would definitely argue with Mo Jingshan. However, Jinwan had always been so calm. She did not even make a fuss once. Previously, Ji Mingran had always thought that Jinwan would definitely lose completely against a tough opponent like Shu Yan. However, right now, with this unexpected result, she really did not have any confidence. Not to mention that Jinwan's current personality was something she could not understand. Furthermore, with Mo Jingshan around, no matter what happened, it would be difficult to harm Jinwan. In front of the Mo family, Shine Group's chairman could not use too forceful methods to force her. After all, there was still the elder. Mo Xiaozi was sandwiched between Elder Mo and Mo Jingshan. There were many things that he could not do even if he wanted to. After all, the person standing by Jinwan's side was none other than Mo Jingshan. That man had a coldness that could cause one's bones to quench with fear. He did not make a sound, but it seeped into every corner. 2 days later, early in the morning, Ji Hongwen discovered that Ji Mingran appeared as though she had not slept for several nights. Ever since she purposely targeted Jinwan at the Mo family, Ji Hongwen had been strict with her. However, it was clear that while he could control her, he could not control her heart. He abruptly said coldly, "You're eating with such a long face. Your father is still alive. Who are you crying for?" Ji Mingran was startled by the sudden words. She almost dropped the chopsticks in her hand. She raised her eyes to say, "Dad, I couldn't sleep for the past 2 nights. That's why. You can't sleep because you've done too many shameful things," Ji Hongwen coldly said. Ji Minggran secretly bit her lips. She endured the grievance and lowered her head to shove a mouthful of rice into her mouth. In the past, when Jinwan was at home, her father would often compare her with Jinwan, praising her for always accompanying him at home. He praised her for being gentle, knowing how to respect her elders, and for not going against him. His words were filled with praise for her and instigation of Jinwan. But now Ji Minggran unwillingly placed her bowl down. Under Ji Hongwen's glare, she had no choice but to pick it up and continue eating. However, the food was tasteless and her stomach was filled with anger. "Old Ji, don't blame Minggran. It's fine if you scolded her a while ago, but do you want to make things difficult for her for the rest of your life? Jinwan isn't an outsider. Both of them are your daughters. The Mo family's matter has been in the past for a long time. It's about time we move on," Shinharu gently persuaded. Ji Hongwen coldly scolded, "Do you think you're very clean? Do you really think I don't know what happened when you took away the chessboard? Without your help, would Minggran have the ability to enter my study to take something?" Shinharu smiled at him as though she was begging for forgiveness. Her gaze then shifted to Ji Minggran, warning her not to cause any more trouble in front of her father. After finishing the meal under Ji Hongwen's cold gaze, Ji Minggran's heart was still burning with anger. While Ji Hongwen was at the company, Ji Minggran slipped out. She could not return to the Yu Garden, and she was unable to find out where Jinwan and Mo Jingshan were staying. The only thing she knew was that Jinwan's studio was in Jinlin Building. She decided to take a taxi there. Entering Jinlin Building, she arrived at the floor where Mo Nwan's studio was located. Seeing the words Mo Nwan's studio, Ji Minggran's expression was calm, but her heart was about to vomit. Just as she was about to enter, she was abruptly blocked by a tall, skinny, short-haired woman. "Who are you?" Ji Minggran was startled by this short-haired woman's cold aura. She took a step back, asking with a confused expression. Feng Ling did not speak, only coldly staring at her, not letting her in. "Are you the receptionist of this studio or some small employee? You dare to block my way? Do you know who I am?" Ji Minggran was extremely displeased at being ignored so coldly. Feng Ling expressionlessly cut her off. "COMO has instructed that the Ji family's second miss and dogs are not to approach within 10 meters of Mrs. Mo." Chapter 153. What did you say? Do you dare to say it again? Ji Minggran was enraged. Feng Ling's gaze was cold. As she wished, she repeated, "The Ji family's second miss and her dog are not allowed to come within 10 meters of Mrs. Mo. You're so daring." Ji Minggran did not expect her to be so daring. She was so angry that she was about to throw her bag at her. In the end, the short-haired woman in front of her nimbly blocked her wrist. She then abruptly twisted it backward, almost breaking Ji Minggran's wrist. She cried out in pain. "Ah!" To prevent the noise from disturbing Jinwan, who was in the middle of a meeting, Feng Ling retracted her hand when Ji Minggran's face was pale from the pain. At the same time, she harshly pushed her 2 meters away. Scram! Feng Ling directly chased her away. Ji Minggran had just arrived and was immediately given such a harsh slap at the door. She was so angry that her entire body was trembling. This woman was the bodyguard Mo Jingshan arranged for Jinwan? It was just a small matter that happened in the Mo family, and now Mo Jingshan actually did not even allow her to approach Jinwan. Exactly how precious was Jinwan? Did he need to protect her so carefully? Wasn't she just a vixen who relied on the beauty of Haicheng's #1 socialite? Since you recognize me, you should know what kind of people the Ji family has in Haicheng. You actually dared to be so heavy-handed against me. I don't care who sent you. Do you believe that I won't sue you? Ji Minggran rubbed her wrist that was almost broken. The skin on her wrist was slightly red. She glared at the short-haired woman angrily. There has never been a bodyguard who dared to treat me like this. Feng Ling appeared as though she did not hear anything. She continued to stand there, maintaining her cold indifference. Ji Minggran did not believe her and continued to walk forward. However, before she could approach, Feng Ling's cold gaze abruptly swept toward her. That gaze landed directly on Ji Minggran's reddened wrist, as though if she dared to take another step closer, she would really break it. Ji Minggran's expression did not soften, but her heart instinctively trembled. She paused and hesitated for a moment. Her gaze then turned toward the glass door of the studio. Feng Ling turned slightly to the side expressionlessly, blocking her view. She did not even give her a chance to look in. Although Ji Minggran was angry, she still kept her guard up. She didn't confront him head-on. She angrily turned around and walked out. Ever since she was slapped by Jin Wan, Ji Minggran's heart was still somewhat fearful and had not met Jin Wan again. Previously he had wanted to use the opportunity of Shuyan coming to Haicheng from America to fan the flames, but in the end he still did not gain any benefits. She wanted to see what was going on with Jin Wan. Could it be that there really was an expert by her side giving her pointers? There must be something wrong with this. Boss Nguyen, the leaders of the City Hall's land office have already gone to Ximin Square for an inspection. Xiaoba ran into Jin Wan's office to report. Jin Wan glanced at the time and stood up to pick up the car keys. Let's go take a look. Xiaoba held the prepared materials in her hands and followed Jin Wan out of the studio. Just as Jin Wan's car was about 100 meters away from the parking lot, a taxi followed behind. Ji Minggran sat in the car and said to the driver, "Follow them. Keep following them. Maintain a distance and don't get discovered." Ji Minggran then realized that Jin Wan was acting strangely. Usually Jin Wan did not need to go to any social events. Her car was not heading in the direction of the U Garden, nor was it heading to the MO Corporation. Could it be that she was heading back to her new residence? Right now Jin Wan was too guarded. Furthermore, they had already shed all pretense of cordiality. Ji Minggran could not brazenly approach her and could only follow quietly, waiting for an opportunity to make a move. In the car in front, Feng Ling drove. At the same time she casually glanced at the rearview mirror. The car suddenly sped up. Xiaoba sat in the front passenger seat and handed the materials in her hands to Jin Wan. "Boss, these are the approval materials that we'll be showing to the land office's leader. Take a look. I've carefully sorted through them. There shouldn't be any problems." Jin Wan took them and lowered her head to read them carefully, as though she was completely unaware of the situation behind the car. Feng Ling's driving skills were very good. She cleverly turned the car into the intersection on the side and quickly passed it. Although she drove very steadily, the sudden speed was too fast. Xiaoba, who was sitting in front, asked in confusion, "Why are you suddenly driving so fast?" Feng Ling did not speak. Her cold eyes were still indifferently glancing at the situation in the rearview mirror. Jin Wan continued to read the materials in her hands without batting an eyelid. She did not make a sound or even ask a question. Ji Minggran noticed that their car had sped up. Could it be that they had been discovered? Did Jin Wan really have an unspeakable secret that she was afraid of being seen by others? Could it be that Jin Wan was going to meet someone? Could it be someone that even Mo Jingshan didn't know? Ji Minggran threw another 200 yuan to the driver, ordering, "Chase after them." The driver received the money and stepped hard on the accelerator. However, no matter how fast the taxi was, it could not compare to Jin Wan's Mercedes-Benz. It was left far behind, but the driver continued to madly chase after them. Jin Wan's car did not stop even when it passed by Ximin Square. Xiaoba called out from the car, "Aya, we've arrived, we've arrived. Why aren't you stopping?" Feng Ling ignored Xiaoba's chatter and continued to speed up expressionlessly. After Jin Wan finished reading the materials in her hands, she raised her head and said calmly, "Continue driving. Make a few more turns." Hearing this, Feng Ling's eyes immediately brightened. She followed her words and continued driving. This time she chose a remote road. The car took more than an hour on the road. When they left the studio, it was already past 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Now it was 5:30 in the evening. The abandoned areas around High City that had been demolished for a long time were covered in dust. Every path was excessively dark. Ji Minggran increasingly felt that Jin Wan must have something she could not tell anyone. Otherwise she would not have driven so fast. She urged them to chase after them. When they neared the abandoned area, all of a sudden, Jin Wan's car drove into the corner ahead. When the car chased after it, it could not be seen at all. Where did it go? The driver's expression was confused. There were 2 roads ahead, and it was impossible to tell which direction the car had gone. This place is filled with broken walls and tiles. The further in we go, the smaller the road becomes. No matter how agile that car is, it can't have gone too far, Ji Minggran said. "I'll go in to take a look. Stop the car here and wait for me." After alighting from the car, Ji Minggran felt that Jin Wan was too strange. What was she doing here? Chapter 154. Ji Minggran took out her phone from her bag. She planned to take a picture of Jin Wan the moment she saw anything wrong with her and bring it back to Mo Jingshan. However, even after walking for a long time, she did not hear any sound. The car could not drive in any further. Since the car did not come out, it could not continue driving in. Where exactly was it parked? The paths in the ruins twisted and turned, like a small maze. Ji Mingran walked in for more than 10 minutes before reaching the end of the road. The sky was getting darker and darker and she felt uneasy. She turned around and started to walk back. Just as she was about to turn on the flashlight function on her phone to light up the road ahead, a tall and thin figure suddenly appeared from behind a wall and blocked her way. Ji Mingran was startled and froze in her steps. She raised her eyes to see that it was the female bodyguard who blocked her way outside the studio today. She immediately felt a chill run down her spine. Earlier in the parking lot, she did not notice that there was someone else in Jinwan's car. From afar, she only saw Jinwan's car being driven away and immediately followed. She did not expect this female bodyguard to be here as well. You. Ji Mingran quickly took a step back under Feng Ling's cold gaze. Mingran, are you following me? She had just taken 2 steps back when she abruptly heard Jinwan's voice from behind. It was very close. Ji Mingran abruptly stiffened. Her body trembled and she almost did not have the courage to turn around to look at her. She then glanced at the female bodyguard before her and finally realized that she had been played by Jinwan. Feng Ling stood before her and did not speak. She only had a cold smile on her face. As Ji Mingran froze in panic and almost lost her grip on her phone, Feng Ling suddenly reached out and harshly knocked on Ji Mingran's wrist. Ji Mingran's arm immediately felt numb and stinging pain. Her phone fell from her palm. Feng Ling quickly caught it and casually slipped it into her pocket. What are you doing? Return my phone. Ji Mingran was shocked and rushed forward to snatch it back. However, how could she match up to Feng Ling's speed? The moment she rushed forward, the short-haired woman had already taken 2 steps back, causing her to almost fall to the ground. Ji Mingran forced herself to stand firm, suppressing the uneasiness in her heart. She thought for a moment and turned back. Seeing Jinwan standing behind her with a calm and indifferent expression, she subconsciously tightened her grip. Seeing Ji Mingran's frightened expression, Jinwan indifferently curved her lips. When she left the studio, she knew there was a car following her. She had heard from Feng Ling that Ji Mingran had gone to look for her during the day. She could guess that Ji Mingran must have been too suspicious, so she followed them quietly. Ji Mingran's thirst for knowledge was too strong. After chasing for so long, she didn't even consider if there would be any danger. She just kept following him like this. Jinwan smiled coldly. You've been following me for so long. Have you found anything? Right now, Ji Mingran could no longer treat Jinwan as the original Jinwan. She cautiously and fearfully explained, Big sister, don't misunderstand. Dad said that you started your own studio and was worried that you wouldn't be able to handle it, so he asked me to come over to help. In the end, I was blocked outside by your people. As she spoke, Ji Mingran cautiously glanced at the female bodyguard. Feng Ling coldly watched her. Ji Mingran's gaze faltered, and she rushed to face Jinwan. Earlier on, I was near your studio. When I saw your car leave, I followed out of curiosity. After all, Dad said that he was worried that you'd lose all the money you've invested. He was also afraid that you'd meet with trouble in such a scheming business and that you'd embarrass the Ji family, so I followed to take a look. Jinwan crossed her arms, smiling mildly at her, but did not speak. Even though she knew how clumsy her excuse was, Ji Mingran could only force herself to continue. Even though the sky was dark and the wind was cold, Ji Mingran's body was already covered in cold sweat. A little sister who can't wait for me to embarrass myself in front of the Mo family, but now, just because of a few words from Dad, she specially came to show concern for me? Jinwan raised her brows slightly, smiling. So, it turns out that Dad is worried that I'll embarrass him. It seems like I should give him a call tonight to have a good chat. I should at least give him some peace of mind. The moment she heard that she was going to give her father a call, Ji Mingran's expression immediately stiffened. Big sister, I know that I was wrong about the matter at the Mo family. After Dad returned, he scolded me and locked me up at home for many days. Ji Mingran spoke as though she had been wronged. If it weren't for Auntie Shin pleading for me, I might not have been able to leave the house until now. Please forgive me, okay? Besides, you didn't suffer any harm from that incident. After all, the two of us are blood-related sisters. Why do you have to keep harping on such a small matter? Jinwan calmly watched her, her tone slowly dragging out. Forgive? Just like when I was young, you secretly took my favorite dress to wear. After you dirted it, you begged me to forgive you, but the next day, you refused to repent and continued to steal my other dresses? Seeing that Jinwan could still bring up their childhood, Ji Mingran took the opportunity to say, Big sister, we're blood-related sisters. We lost our mothers when we were so young. We grew up together, enough. Jin Wan had long lost her patience with her. I don't have the mood to act like sisters with you. Ji Mingran's expression trembled. She knew that Jin Wan really did not intend to give her any face. She directly shouted at her angrily, ever since you married into the Mo family, you've become completely arrogant, haven't you? First, you strangely forbade me from going to the Yu garden. Then, you guarded against me time and time again. When I returned to the Ji family, you even targeted me. I was unhappy in my heart. That's why I wanted to embarrass you at the Mo family that time. Yet, you still bear a grudge against me. Ji Mingran, your ability to be a thief crying thief is really great. Jin Wan lightly mocked. Don't you know why I forbade you from going to the Yu garden? Ji Mingran's expression did not change, but her gaze was guarded as she watched Jin Wan. Do you think that Mo Jingshan would read the messages you sent him? How many times do you think I've taken the medicine prescribed by that so-called psychiatrist? Do you think those little tricks of yours are so secretive? Jin Wan lowered her eyes and sneered. Ji Mingran was startled. Her lips moved, but she could not find any words to explain. Just like that, Jin Wan approached her and looked at this so-called blood-related sister from a very close distance. Then, her lips revealed an unfathomable and cold smile. Chapter 155. Feng Ling nimbly pushed Ji Mingran behind the rubble. Without waiting for Ji Mingran to scream again, Jin Wan expressionlessly turned to leave. Ji Mingran was heavily pushed against the stone wall. Her back hurt from the impact. Her face was pale and frightened as she stared at the short-haired woman in front of her. I'm warning you, don't touch me. If you dare to do anything to me here, do you believe that I won't sue you? Even if I sue all 18 generations of your ancestors, they won't be able to rest in peace. Feng Ling coldly glanced at her. I haven't even made a move. What are you screaming for? Ji Mingran's face instantly turned red and white. Her hands gripped her clothes tightly, afraid that she would be beaten. She was so nervous that even her knuckles turned white. Don't be afraid. Mrs. Mo doesn't intend to take your life. Feng Ling held back a cold smile. But second Miss Ji, your thirst for knowledge is too strong. I can't possibly let you follow me for nothing. Since you're already here, don't be in a rush to leave. What do you mean? Ji Mingran's lips trembled from the coldness in her eyes. Feng Ling took out Ji Mingran's phone that she had previously placed in her pocket. Ji Mingran glanced at it and reached out to snatch it back. Return it to me. However, before her hand could touch it, the phone slipped from Feng Ling's hand. She could not catch it in time and it fell heavily to the ground. Ji Mingran knew that something was wrong and rushed to pick it up. However, the phone was abruptly stepped on by Feng Ling's foot. The sound of the screen shattering could be heard from under her feet. Ji Mingran watched this scene and her entire body turned cold. She slowly raised her eyes and resisted the urge to cry. Her body trembled as she stood up and leaned back cautiously. In an instant, she bumped into the stone wall behind her. Do you know what this place is? Feng Ling's tone was still cold. Ji Mingran subconsciously scanned the surroundings and answered guiltily, this is a small area that was demolished a long time ago. Feng Ling was very tall and looked down at her. After so many years, no developer has come to rebuild it. Second Miss Ji, have you never heard of the reason? Ji Mingran's expression gradually changed from fear to alarm. She abruptly raised her eyes to look at Feng Ling. If she remembered correctly, this was a new neighborhood built a few years ago. Many people had successfully moved in, but not long after, there were rumors of hauntings and frequent strange occurrences, causing many people to quickly move out. Back then, the unscrupulous developers had occupied the unmarked graveyard area of High City from 100 years ago. However, after the baptism of time, many people had forgotten the original purpose of this land, so they bought houses here. But in the past, there were often rumors that this place was haunted, and no one dared to go near it. Later, because everyone moved away and because the rumors of the strange incidents became worse and worse, the place was demolished. Until now, no developer dared to come and occupy this piece of land. Right now, the place they were standing on was the unmarked graveyard from 100 years ago, and the stone walls that had been torn apart. The weather forecast says it's going to rain tonight. Did Miss Ji bring an umbrella? Otherwise, if you stay here alone, it won't be good if you catch a cold from the rain. As Feng Ling spoke, she decisively snatched the bag from Ji Mingran's hands. She opened the zipper and turned the bag upside down, pouring all the things inside onto the ground. She then lowered her eyes to look at the various cosmetics and bank cards inside. She laughed coldly and casually kicked them a few times. She smiled faintly, You really didn't bring an umbrella. Seems like you can only be drenched by the rain. What do you mean I'll stay here alone? Ji Mingran's back was cold and her lips were pale from fright. She could no longer care about the things in her bag. Not really alone. Feng Ling suddenly smiled coldly and evilly glanced at her. Tonight, perhaps many people will float out from the ground to accompany you. So, second Miss Ji, you don't have to be too afraid. What exactly do you want? I don't want to be here. Scram. Let me go. Ji Mingran was so frightened that all the hair on her body stood up. She screamed and reached out to push her away to escape. Feng Ling avoided her hand and grabbed her wrist, heavily pushing Ji Mingran back against the stone wall. This is the simplest warning. In the future, if you dare to follow Mrs. Mo again, I'm afraid it won't be as simple as being thrown here for a night. Feng Ling coldly said, Second Miss Ji, I hope you have a good time tonight. What are you doing? Come back. Give me your cell phone. Ji Mingran was afraid that she would really be thrown here. Right now, she had nothing in her hands and it was impossible for her to hail a taxi in this area. She pounced over like a madwoman to grab her. In the end, she was mercilessly flung back by Feng Ling. She staggered backward and fell onto the ground. Several minutes later, Feng Ling returned to the car and said to Jin Wan, Mrs. Mo, we can leave now. Xiao Ba was still unclear of the situation, but seeing Jin Wan's cold and thoughtful expression, she did not dare to ask. When Feng Ling returned, she glanced at the time and softly said, Boss Nguyen, the people at Ximin Square should still be there. Are we still going? Yes. Jin Wan closed the documents in her hands. Let's go. Ji Mingran struggled to stand up with much difficulty. She walked forward step by step, wanting to return to the taxi she had taken earlier. However, the ruins were truly like a maze. She searched for a long time before she finally found it. However, the taxi had already driven away out of patience. The sky had already darkened completely. It was indeed raining at night, and the originally dark sky was now covered with dark clouds. Gusts of cold wind blew from behind her, accompanied by the sharp sound of the wind coming from the cracks in the dilapidated stone walls. Each sound was more terrifying than the one before. Ji Mingran was so frightened that her face was drained of all color. She frantically ran out, but even when she reached the wide road, she still could not see a single car passing by. This was originally the most desolate and abandoned place in Haicheng. Usually no one would pass by here. The highway to Haicheng was also not here, and very few cars would use this road. The moment she thought of how Jin Wan had purposely bypassed half of Haicheng just to bring her here, Ji Mingran hatefully yelled at the dark ruins, Jin Wan, just you wait. The surroundings were so quiet that there was not even a single echo. Only the sound of the wind blew from behind her. The cold rain landed on her face bit by bit. Ji Mingran was so cold that she hugged her chest tightly. She cautiously and fearfully turned back to look at the ruins that had been demolished. She had previously heard that this place was haunted. The various frightening things that happened late at night caused her legs to weaken. Chapter 156. After returning to Ximin Square, Jin Wan successfully received the approval document from the National Land Office. Boss, since the surrounding land and housing prices are rising, should we sell off the properties nearby as well? Xiao Ba asked. Jin Wan sat quietly in the car looking at the rain outside the window. She calmly replied, not selling. What? It's not easy to wait for an opportunity to raise the price. If we don't sell now, we'll suffer losses like before. Jin Wan chuckled and glanced at Xiao Ba. You see, I've recently used the Mo Corporation's funds to purchase a few pieces of land that are extremely expensive. I'm so worried that I can't even sleep, am I right? Xiao Ba grinned, nodding her head. However, she still said, but I believe in boss's intuition. Since you dare to do it, you definitely have your reasons. At least you know how to talk. Jin Wan chuckled. She knew that she would definitely earn money, but she could not be too reckless. If she relied on her ability to predict the future and seized all the opportunities, she would only become the target of everyone else. In this ruthless business world, how many people became rich overnight, and how many people were immediately targeted by others? With every step, they would be hindered by their peers as though they were walking on the edge of a knife. What Jin Wan needed to do was to carry her ambition in this prosperous era, and walk steadily step by step. Every share of the soup must be kept safely in her own pocket, and would not be eaten away by any enemies. What she needed to do was to gradually develop the studio into a property brand company that belonged to her. Bit by bit, she would turn the funds in her hands into several times the profits. She needed to have the ability to support herself and the Ji family. She needed to do better and no longer need to be shielded by Mo Jingshan. What she needed to do was to be able to shield Mo Jingshan from the wind and rain one day. All of a sudden Xiaoba pointed at the laptop on her lap, shouting, "Boss, look at the company's email. YJ Group said they want to buy the land beside Ximin Square. They offered 200 million yuan. They even sent such an official company email. That's 200 million yuan? Isn't this the same price that CEO Han bought it for? They actually didn't make a loss. Boss, how did you guess it? You're too amazing. When I received the documents earlier, I was worried that no one would accept your offer, but there really is someone who wants it." Jin Wan raised her brows, speaking calmly. "Use the company's name to reply with an official email. Be polite and don't offend them. Tell them that we don't accept the price of 200 million yuan. If they are sincere, they can come to the studio to discuss with me." "Why not? Previously, no one would buy that piece of land for less than 200 million. Now we can finally recoup our losses." "Boss, aren't you planning to sell it? Just do as I say." Jin Wan calmly glanced at her. Xiaoba saw Jin Wan's calm and composed expression. Although she didn't quite understand, her heart ached as if it was cutting her flesh. She was afraid that she would lose this rare opportunity to recoup her losses, but after all, Jin Wan was the boss, so she had to do as she was told. Glancing at Xiaoba's sulky expression, Jin Wan just smiled and didn't say anything more. In Jin Wan's impression, 10 years later, the largest building complex in Haicheng Ximin Square would be located on the land in her hands. The developer would be the country's famous real estate company, BGY Group. If history was not wrong with BGY's accurate foresight, he would definitely not miss out on this prime location and would definitely appear. The price would not be as simple as 200 million. After getting the approval documents, Jin Wan naturally attended a dinner party jointly held by the city hall and the business community. Today Jin Wan wore an off-shoulder nude evening gown. Her face was lightly made up. She was already attractive and right now she was even more beautiful. Her lips were red and her skin was fair. Beneath the gown was a pair of long, slender legs. She wore high heels and her usual casual demeanor was gone. She exuded the charm of a little woman. For many years, she had always been so beautiful that people could not take their eyes off her. Tonight, she appeared here as the person in charge of the studio and caused quite a stir. Firstly, it seemed that the eldest Miss Ji hadn't attended such a formal occasion for a long time. Secondly, after marrying into the Mo family, she had been keeping a low profile and rarely showed up. Last time at the Mo Corporation and Shine's dinner party, she was carried away by Mo Jingshan. Although many of the people present hadn't seen the scene that night, they had heard of Mrs. Mo. Right now Mrs. Mo seemed to be very stable. Many people did not expect that Jin Wan would actually be able to stand firmly by Mo Jingshan's side. She was not even chased out by the Mo family. Most of Haicheng's wealthy young ladies hoped that Jin Wan would not be able to live well. However, things did not go as they wished. Jin Wan was as beautiful as ever. In fact, compared to the arrogant and bright her of the past, she appeared more composed and reserved. Her exquisite makeup hid her beautiful and aggressive appearance, and her low-key evening dress made her appear even more indifferent. She was beautiful, but she was no longer arrogant. Instead, she appeared cold and elegant. Apart from this, the female bodyguard by her side was also particularly eye-catching. "Mrs. Mo, I'll wait for you over there. If anything happens, I'll come over immediately." Feng Ling knew that it was not convenient for her to follow by Jin Wan's side. After sending Jin Wan over, she took her leave. Jin Wan had Feng Ling head to the resting area to eat something while she walked in alone. She ignored the gazes of the people around her and maintained a dignified and polite smile. However, she did not expect to meet Sheng Yihan in such a place. From afar, she saw the tall figure dressed in a suit. Jin Wan felt a lump in her throat. "What are you hiding from?" She walked away from the crowd and was about to go to the leaders of the National Land Office when she was interrupted by Sheng Yihan, who had approached her without her noticing. Jin Wan ignored him and did not respond. In the blink of an eye, she began to chat with several celebrities who used to be friends with the Ji family, trying to ignore Sheng Yihan's figure and the gaze he was casting at her. Seeing that she was deliberately avoiding him, Sheng Yihan smiled and was not in a hurry to go over. He waited until the celebrities left after exchanging greetings with her. Then he looked at the little woman who turned around in the crowd and couldn't find other acquaintances. She couldn't help but look back at him. He looked at her snow-white neck and wrists. Unlike other socialites who wore all kinds of luxurious accessories, she was so clean that there was not even a simple thin chain or diamond watch. However, she was beautiful in her own way. Jean Wan remembered that at the Shine Group's dinner party, she had sat in his car because she was drunk. At that time she was so angry that she was muddle-headed. Now, she tried to avoid him as much as possible and did not want to have any contact with him. She turned to quickly walk out of the crowd. However, because she turned too quickly, she accidentally bumped into a beautiful woman holding a glass of red wine. Chapter 157. Jean Wan usually did not pay much attention to the people at such banquets. However, when she saw the beautiful lady's face, her movements faltered. Her slightly apologetic expression immediately faded. This beautiful lady had once formed a grudge with her. She was the pearl of a furniture company, and her surname seemed to be Han. This Miss Han was once one of Mo Jingshan's pursuers. It could not be said that Mo Jingshan was not someone these people could easily meet. Especially after his marriage, these socialites who once had a crush on him and even threatened to jump off a building just to meet him could not even catch a glimpse of his back. This Miss Han, who had once appeared on Hai Cheng's news for almost jumping off a building for Mo Jingshan, was unconvinced by Jean Wan's title as the #1 socialite due to her beautiful appearance. She had tried to compete with Jean Wan several times at banquets, but was always coldly ignored by Jean Wan. As time passed, they began to dislike each other and formed a grudge. What angered her even more was that after Jean Wan married Mo Jingshan, she not only lost completely, but was also angered to the point of vomiting blood. Being able to meet Jean Wan again at such an occasion, Miss Han naturally would not miss out on the opportunity to nitpick. Although Jean Wan did not have much feelings for this Miss Han, when she saw the red wine stains on her gown, she lightly mocked, "You're still holding the wine glass firmly in your hand, but the wine in the glass has spilled all over you. Do you need me to tell you how exactly you spilled it? Are you sure you want to use such a despicable method to frame me at a banquet between the political and business worlds?" Miss Han's expression was unquenchable. "What do you mean? You're still polite after knocking into me? This gown of mine was just ordered from overseas. Let's not talk about how expensive it was, but you ruined it the moment I put it on." Jean Wan was expressionless, but she did not wish to waste her energy arguing with someone like this. She calmly glanced at her and impatiently asked, "So what do you want?" Miss Han looked at Jean Wan arrogantly and then glanced at the gown Jean Wan was wearing. She recognized that this gown was made by a famous designer in Paris and immediately said, "Take off your gown. Wear it for me." Jean Wan slightly raised her brows. "Are you sure?" Originally, the commotion here was not loud, but because Miss Han had intentionally raised her voice, all sorts of unfriendly gazes were directed toward Jean Wan. There were many people who were on the same side as Miss Han. In Hai Cheng, there were many who were unconvinced by Jean Wan and could not bear to see Jean Wan marrying into the Mo family. Various wealthy young ladies saw this scene and approached to watch. Their gazes were all directed in Jean Wan's direction. They stood by the side and pointed, whispering, and their gazes were unkind. "What's going on?" Miss Lin, who had a good relationship with Miss Han, walked over and asked deliberately. Miss Han said unhappily, "A certain Hai Cheng's #1 socialite is now crowned with the Mo family's name. She walks around with her eyes on the top of her head and doesn't even look at others. She bumped into me and caused my red wine to spill all over my body. In the end, not only did she refuse to apologize, she even became arrogant in front of me. Tell me, how can there be such logic in this world? She dirted my gown, and I have to bow and scrape to her on account of her status as Mrs. Mo?" By the side, Miss Lin and the other wealthy young ladies all shifted their gazes toward Jean Wan. Facing a common love rival, they naturally stood on the same side. To be able to see Jean Wan make a fool of herself in front of everyone was naturally a joyous thing. Miss Lin spoke with a conciliatory tone, "Since that's the case, then Mrs. Mo should apologize to Miss Han. After all, you've dirted her gown. Although your status is high and the clothes you wear are many times better than ours, you can't look down on others like this. Is someone else's gown not a gown? If it's dirted, you have to apologize." A smile appeared on Jean Wan's face. "Me apologize?" Miss Han and Miss Lin stood before Jean Wan, but for some reason they felt that their aura could not compare to Jean Wan's. They felt as though they were shorter in front of her. However, there were still many people watching by the side, and there were many who were unhappy with Jean Wan. Miss Han met Jean Wan's eyes and said, "Earlier on, didn't you ask me how I want to resolve this matter? I've already said take off your own clothes. I'll let this matter go like this." Jean Wan tilted her head slightly, looking at her with a smile that was not a smile. "Miss Han, you really don't care about trifles. Do you really like wearing clothes that others have worn? You don't have misophobia, but I have a very severe misophobia. I'd rather throw this gown into a shredder than allow others to touch my things. As she spoke, she paused for several seconds. Also, Miss Han, you only have 2 mouthfuls of red wine left in your hand. You're holding the glass so firmly. I only turned around and bumped into you. It doesn't even count as bumping into you. Such a small amount of wine actually spilled onto you, and you cleverly stained it in the most obvious spot. I can't even be sure if I actually touched the hand you used to hold the wine. Do you really have to make a big deal out of it? Could it be that you've contracted Parkinson's at such a young age? Your hands trembled to the point where someone only touched you slightly, and the wine in this glass spilled onto you? You. Miss Han instantly stared at Jin Wan in disbelief. She was so angry that her face was pale. She was clearly telling others that she was framing her and intentionally stirring up trouble. Right now, the one whose gown was dirted is me. Miss Han gritted her teeth in anger. Mrs. Mo, your face is really too ugly when you're trying to push the blame away. Am I pushing the blame away? If you can prove that this wine was indeed spilled by me, I'll immediately compensate you with a gown of the same style. But if you want me to take it off and give it to you, I'm afraid you're not qualified. Besides, Jin Wan's gaze calmly swept across her body. You're shorter than me by 5 centimeters, but you're clearly several kilograms heavier than me. Are you sure that even if I take it off you'll be able to wear it? Jin Wan's speech was not fast, but there was no way for others to interrupt. The one who could not interrupt the most was naturally Miss Han. She was so angry that her hands were trembling. Chapter 158. For so many years, the reason why Jin Wan was not liked by these women in the socialite circle was because of her unyielding face and her mouth. Jin Wan was never at a disadvantage. Regardless of whether it was in the past or now, even after 10 more years of life experience, under her calm and reserved appearance, her personality of not allowing others to step on her head was still there. Whoever wanted to take advantage of her would most likely have to go back to the furnace and be remolded for several years. But from the looks of it, it really seemed as though she, Mrs. Mo, was bullying some of the Han family's young ladies. After all, her title of Mrs. Mo was enough to suppress others. Furthermore, this title caused all these wealthy young ladies to grit their teeth in hatred. Miss Lin saw that Miss Han was angered to the point of speechlessness and directly took a step forward. Mrs. Mo's aura is really great. As expected, you're different after marrying Mo Jingshan. I heard that the last time you appeared in such an occasion, you pretended to be weak and was carried by Xiao Mo. We were still wondering how you managed such a marriage. So, it turns out that you're just pretending to be a little white flower in front of Xiao Mo? Now that Xiao Mo isn't here, you're starting to put on an oppressive aura again, aren't you? As expected, you're a scheming woman. Do you dare to say that you didn't purposely dirty her clothes? Do you dare to say that you're not targeting her? Jin Wan coldly glanced at her. Why would I target her? Isn't it because you know that Miss Han has always liked Xiao Mo? And because she once had a little relationship with Xiao Mo, you're jealous and hate her in your heart. Today, seeing her here, you want to dirty her clothes and embarrass her? Besides, who here doesn't know what kind of conduct you had in the past? You're an arrogant young lady who has bullied others many times. Why are you pretending to be innocent and virtuous now? Jin Wan's expression immediately darkened. Aside from being too lazy to pay attention to idlers like you, when have I ever bullied anyone? Pride doesn't seem to need you to judge. For example, this Miss Han in front of me. She asked me to take off my gown for her to wear, but I refused. She lifted a rock to smash her own feet and lost face, and now it's me who's bullying her? You're targeting me from the start. Otherwise, you wouldn't have bumped into me. Miss Han took the opportunity to speak. Jin Wan narrowed her eyes. Once, in order to pursue my husband, you even resorted to jumping off a building and acting crazily. In the end, he didn't even give you a single glance. How are you worthy of my attention? How is he worthy of me targeting him? The past was suddenly brought up again. Miss Han's expression instantly turned green. Her heart was pierced by Jin Wan's words of, my husband. You have to know your place. If you can't take back the dirty water you've spilled, kneel on the ground and lick it clean. Don't expect others to wipe it for you. Jin Wan coldly said and turned to leave. Jin Wan, don't put on such an arrogant face. You were able to marry into the Mo family because you looked like a vixen. Let's see how many more years you can use this foxy trick. Right now, Mo Jingshan wants you. Who knows what will happen after a few years? If he gets sick of you and kicks you out of the Mo family, you, a second-hand good, can only be surrounded by a group of old men to sleep with you. You only have a face. What capital do you have to be proud of? What are you pretending for? Suddenly Miss Han seemed to have been thoroughly angered and scolded. Jinwan paused and turned to look at her mildly. Just a face for nothing? You don't even have a face and you dare to stand here and talk about capital with me? Miss Han's tone faltered. She did not expect herself to be dragged into this. She gritted her teeth in anger. Miss Han's father was also present. When he heard the commotion he immediately came over. When he saw that it was Jinwan, although Jinwan had the Mo family as her backing, he could not help but furrow his brows when he saw that his daughter was angered to such an extent and that her skirt was dirted. He used the attitude of an elder to instigate, "Mrs. Mo, it's best to be more down to earth. If you do something wrong you should admit it. Although my daughter shouldn't have openly quarreled with you here and hurt your face, since you dirted her clothes, you should at least show the proper attitude. Can't you understand human language?" Jinwan no longer had any patience. She was even more unwilling to fight a battle of attrition with these people and felt that it was a waste of time. Her skirt was dirted by herself. It has nothing to do with me. If you don't believe me you can check the surveillance footage yourself. Stand up and speak after you're done. Miss Han's father's expression immediately turned ugly. Mrs. Mo's upbringing is really too poor. Speaking to your elders like this, is this how your father taught you? It seems like I should find some time to have a chat with Director Ji and Elder Mo. If it were not for the fact that he could not embarrass Jinwan in front of so many people, Miss Han's father really wanted to give Jinwan a slap to let her know what was good for her. Miss Han relied on the fact that everyone was backing her up and that her father was by her side. She immediately looked at Jinwan arrogantly and domineeringly. The truth is right in front of us. After all, you did touch me and the force with which you touched me can't be seen from the surveillance footage. Right now we can turn this into a small matter. I still have that request. Take off your clothes. So what if I can't wear it? I didn't say I wanted to wear it. Take off your clothes in front of everyone, and I won't bicker with you. At this moment, a lazy and smiling voice came from behind Jinwan. Miss Han, are you sure you want Mrs. Mo to take off her clothes in front of everyone? There are at least dozens of people here if not hundreds. With so many people here, I'm afraid it won't be enough for Mo Jingshan to dig them out. This voice belonged to Sheng Yihan. Although he was clearly speaking for Jinwan, his words still caused Jinwan to feel extremely unhappy. His words were obviously filled with sarcasm and mockery that only she could hear. Mr. Sheng, I heard that you once had some relations with the Ji family. Aren't you afraid of causing a misunderstanding by standing up for Mrs. Mo at this time? Miss Han could no longer suppress her anger. She completely did not give Sheng Yihan any face. Even though he was already the successor of the Sheng family and his status could not be underestimated, she refused to let things go just like that. Besides, Mrs. Mo can't possibly not have a spare set of clothes. It's just taking off her gown. It can't be that she doesn't even have underwear underneath. She's Hai Cheng's #1 socialite. If she doesn't reveal her figure for everyone to see, who can say that she's worthy of these words? Miss Han glared at Jinwan. Miss Han, the Sheng family's department store is nearby. If you want, you can choose a few items at any time. They'll all be under this Sheng's name. Sheng Yihan continued to smile lightly. There's no need to make things so difficult for her. Miss Han did not give up. Mr. Sheng, are you trying to be a flower protector? What if I insist that Jinwan take off her clothes today? This Sheng has said everything. The Sheng family's department store's doors are always open for Miss Han, but you clearly do not plan on giving me this face. Sheng Yihan smiled faintly. Miss Han had already lost her rationality from anger. She coldly snorted. If Mr. Sheng's face is useless, then what about mine? Chapter 159. Jinwan was also startled. Tonight, Mo Jingshan had other matters to attend to in the company and could not leave. He gave her a chance to be independent, so she did not ask to come. She did not expect him to actually appear. She clearly did not suffer any grievances and it was just a small argument. However, in this situation and with Sheng Yihan present, she subconsciously felt her scalp tighten. Hearing Mo Jingshan's voice, Miss Han's expression changed greatly. She turned back in disbelief, and the moment she saw Mo Jingshan, she felt her legs weaken. Mo Sio Mo. Everyone looked in that direction. The man was dressed in a black suit, revealing a white shirt. His black trousers were straight and meticulous, and his handmade Italian leather shoes were unhurried as he walked out from the crowd. The moment the tall, handsome man appeared in the hall, he carried a cold aura, causing the people around him to hold their breaths and take a step back. No one dared to stand out and say a word. The man's cold and indifferent brows under his short hair were covered with a thin layer of frost. His perfect, heart-stopping silhouette revealed a cold indifference that no one dared to approach. The moment Jin Wan met Mo Jingshan's gaze, she slowly pursed her lips. These people never had a moment of peace. They insisted on making a low-key person like him unhappy on such an occasion. If they provoked Mo Jingshan, they would be the ones to suffer in the end. Even she didn't want to see the scene of these people being abused later. What's more, she felt that if her husband's cold aura was seen by these women who had ill intentions toward him, they would have all sorts of thoughts in their hearts. She really wanted to hide this man away. Miss Han looked at the approaching man. She knew better than anyone that Mo Jingshan's gaze had never landed on anyone else for even a second. From beginning to end, the person he was looking at was Jin Wan. Xiao had thought about this man for so long, but she had never received the slightest bit of his favor. Not even a moment of eye contact had passed. Everyone looked at Mo Jingshan. From the moment he appeared, no one dared to speak. Not to mention the business world or the political world, many people in Haicheng had to rely on the Mo family. Therefore, even if these people did not give face to the Sheng family, they would not dare to offend Mo Jingshan in the slightest. Otherwise, they would not have a good ending. It was just that she didn't expect that Sheng Yihan would protect Jin Wan even though she was the target of public criticism. It was said that Sheng Yihan had a deep relationship with the Ji family, and it was clear that they were enemies. But more importantly, Mo Jingshan would come. Mo Jingshan actually appeared. This was an absolutely unexpected result. If they had known that he would come, who would have dared to take the opportunity to spew dirty water on Mrs. Mo? Now, the people around them all wanted to retreat 800 meters away to avoid being implicated. Mo Jingshan walked up to Jin Wan and stopped. He touched her hair, which was a rare sight. He lowered his eyes to look at the evening gown she was wearing, his voice low and heavy. Very beautiful. Jin Wan, the surrounding people were completely taken aback. Although they had heard that Mo Jingshan seemed to care a lot about Jin Wan, they never expected that in such an occasion and under such an atmosphere, the first thing he would do after appearing would be to praise his wife's beauty. He really did not place anyone in his eyes at all. Miss Han felt even more embarrassed by the sight. Back then, in order to speak to Mo Jingshan, she even wanted to jump off a building, but this man was so cold that he did not even look at her. He did not even send a secretary to comfort her. Even when the news of her wanting to jump off a building was published on social news and the reporters went to interview him, he still did not respond. It was as though any woman who pursued him and liked him did not exist in his eyes, and he did not need to waste a single second on them. But towards this Jin Wan, although Jin Wan didn't suffer any loss just now, she was still a little nervous in front of so many people. Now that Mo Jingshan was by her side, she seemed to be relaxed. Standing by his side, she didn't speak but just smiled. No matter where you go, there are people who want to bully you. Is it because you're too weak, or does everyone think that Mrs. Mo can be ridden on by anyone? Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold and his tone was cold. However, it revealed a sense of protection that belonged solely to Jin Wan. The surrounding people did not dare to breathe loudly because of his words. Jin Wan smiled. She was about to say that she was not bullied when the man reached out and pulled her into his embrace. He held her waist, allowing her to lean into his embrace. He then touched her shoulder and lowered his eyes to look at her. Not cold? Jin Wan shook her head. There's air conditioning in the banquet hall. It's not cold. By the side, Miss Lin and Miss Han watched with reddened eyes. Earlier, this Jin Wan was arrogant as though she was not afraid of anyone. However, with Mo Jingshan's arrival in the blink of an eye, she seemed to have softened into a harmless little rabbit. She was completely protected in the man's embrace. Her earlier domineering appearance was nowhere to be seen. Dear Mo, don't be fooled by her. Earlier she was very arrogant. Did she always pretend to be so weak and pitiful when she was with you? She was clearly the one who bumped into me here. She refused to apologize and even... Miss Han's eyes were red from anger as she spoke. Mo Jingshan patted Jin Wan's head and turned to look at Miss Han. He said with a smile that did not seem like a smile, "Earlier on, were you the one who asked her to take off her clothes in public?" Miss Han originally wanted to use this opportunity to smear Jin Wan's name. However, the moment she met Mo Jingshan's gaze, her heart was instantly filled with fear. She resisted the fear and straightened her neck to say, "My gown was dirted by her. Initially, I only wanted to exchange gowns with her. She was the one who refused and even turned around to bite me. She even brought up the past, between you and me to mock me." Miss Han softened her voice as she spoke. She was slightly embarrassed. However, Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold as he watched her. Me and you? What happened between us? Do we know each other? Miss Han's complexion instantly paled. The surrounding young ladies all looked at her with pity and disdain. Not only did Miss Han's expression turn ugly, but everyone present also stared in disbelief at Mo Jingshan, who was protecting Jin Wan in his embrace. Mo Jingshan's words clearly sounded calm and unemotional, but it was as though a sharp knife had silently drilled out, stabbing Miss Han until she was covered in blood. Miss Han bit her lips hard. She did not expect that back then, when she was willing to risk her life for him and jumped off a building, shocking the entire city. Mo Jingshan, as the person involved, did not even remember her name. Mo. Miss Han felt wronged. She still wanted to fight for herself. Chapter 160. Mo Jingshan's tone was very calm, but it was cold and dangerous. Jin Wan suddenly felt a bone-piercing coldness and viciousness from this man who had always treated her gently and patiently. Actually, it's not a big deal. They can't pressure me, Jin Wan whispered in his arms. However, Mo Jingshan only caressed her hair, speaking warmly, "Be good. Some people must be taught a lesson. Your temper is good, but it doesn't mean I'll tolerate it." The expression on Miss Han's face was about to shatter, and the people around her were sighing in their hearts. Jin Wan had a good temper? When had Jin Wan's temper ever been good? Was it because Jin Wan's acting skills were too good, or was it because beauty was in the eye of the beholder? Jin Wan was also speechless for a moment. She gently pinched his sleeves and softly said, "Tonight's banquet, my goal is to leave a good impression in the eyes of the City Hall's Homeland Security Department. You just have to help me regain my face. Don't let this kind of thing bother you." Mo Jingshan placed another comforting kiss on her hair. "All right, I know." His attitude couldn't be considered very gentle, but it made the eyes of all the rich young ladies, including Miss Han, almost turn red. The man who was usually so cold and indifferent actually gave all his love to Jin Wan alone. "What? Mo. I think today's matter, we should just muddle through." Miss Han's father braced himself and said, "This matter, my daughter is indeed in the wrong." Her beloved gown was dirted, so she couldn't control her emotions and offended Mrs. Mo. "This is really..." Miss Han's father still wanted to speak but was stopped by Mo Jingshan's gaze. "The thing I hate the most is seeing my woman being bullied in public. Everyone here, who else wishes to see her undress?" Miss Han and Miss Lin couldn't help but shiver. Sheng Yihan didn't feel anything because of the scene just now. Seeing Jin Wan in Mo Jingshan's arms, he glanced at Mo Jingshan and smiled with interest. Seeing that Miss Han was frightened to the point of trembling, Mo Jingshan's dark eyes swept past her. "Since you're the first to find trouble, don't you want someone to test your figure in front of everyone? Then you start. You take it off first." Miss Han's expression was stiff. Her fingers gripped the hem of her dress tightly. As she faced Mo Jingshan, she felt her heart tremble. At the same time, she blushed because Mo Jingshan had forced her to take off her clothes. Seeing that Miss Han was still blushing at such a time, Jin Wan felt upset. She raised her eyes to glance at Mo Jingshan. The man lowered his head to look at the woman in his arms who appeared to be jealous. He then glanced at the time and knew that she did not have the patience to continue dealing with these people. He then turned to look at them. Those who were making a ruckus just now, who wants to see them take off their clothes? This Mo doesn't mind asking this hotel to open up a hall for you to watch. There were many people present, but the room was silent. No one dared to make a sound. Everyone could tell that Mo Jingshan's so-called opening up the hall was actually to send these troublemakers to a certain place. In any case, it would not be a good place and they would definitely not have a good ending. "You don't want to take it off?" Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at Miss Han, suddenly smiling coldly. "Then why don't we follow Mr. Sheng's earlier suggestion and dig out a pair of eyes to take a look?" Miss Han's face instantly turned pale. Her eyes were filled with fear. Mo Jingshan's gaze coldly swept across the crowd. At this moment, the bodyguards rushed in. Even Feng Ling, who previously did not move because she thought Jin Wan could handle everything, also walked in. Mo Jingshan's tone was low and slow, but it carried a bone-chilling coldness. "Take them away. Take off your clothes and throw them in front of the hotel as a public display." "No." Miss Han instantly screamed. "I don't want to take off my clothes. I don't want to." In the end, the bodyguards had already stepped forward to hold her down. Miss Han screamed and struggled madly. Don't want. Mo, you can't do this to me. My clothes were dirted by Jin Wan. I was only joking with her. I didn't really want to do anything to her. Mo Jingshan's thin lips curved up without any warmth. He glanced at her as though she was the real joke. So, are you going to take it off yourself or do you want my people to help you? I'll take it off. I'll take it off. Miss Han struggled to free her hands. She cried as she raised her hands and tugged the shoulders of her gown down. Although it was only a little, she still felt extremely embarrassed. She looked at Mo Jingshan with a sullen face, begging him to let her off. Mo Jingshan's cold gaze did not even look at her. He turned to look at Miss Lin, who was stunned by the sight. Do you want my people to help you or do you want to do it yourself? Miss Lin did not expect that she would not be able to escape. She stood awkwardly on the spot. When she saw the bodyguards approaching, she was frightened into a low cry. She hugged her shoulders and squatted on the ground, crying. She refused to take off her gown no matter what. Miss Han's father could not stand it any longer. He could only turn to Jin Wan and say softly, Mrs. Mo, today's matter is our fault, but this matter, there are many people from the political world present. If this matter blows up, it won't be beneficial to anyone. His intention was for Jin Wan to plead for leniency. He was clear that if Jin Wan did not speak up right now, Mo Jingshan would settle the score with everyone present. Jin Wan thought about it. Although she did not have good intentions, she did not wish for Mo Jingshan to make a big fuss over her. She did not wish for her matters to implicate him. Furthermore, this was a matter between women. Jin Wan was about to raise her head from his embrace when she abruptly heard Mo Jingshan's voice above her head, using the people from the political world to warn her. Do you think this Mo is just a decoration here? Miss Han's father instantly felt awkward. Indeed. No one present dared to refute Mo Jingshan at this moment. Even the people from the political world had to give him some face. In such a situation, the people from the political world would only think of ways to quickly appease Mo Jingshan's anger. Who would dare to have any prejudice against Jin Wan, whom he was protecting in his embrace? Miss Han cried by the side while tugging at her clothes. Her movements were very slow. Mo Jingshan's gaze did not look in that direction. His hand caressed Jin Wan's head as he softly asked, Have you calmed down? Jin Wan nodded. Although it was indeed very satisfying, she still tugged on his sleeve to softly say, Just let them apologize. In the future, I still need to work in the business world. I can't leave too much of a shadow in the hearts of so many people. Otherwise, in the future when these people see me, they will have to take a detour. The banquet hall was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. The only sound that could be heard was the rustling of Miss Han's clothes. Chapter 161. Miss Han thought that she could use this opportunity to escape. In the end, Jin Wan only glanced at her, a hint of a smile yet not a smile in the depths of her eyes. Although I didn't plan on taking things too far, if an apology can solve the problem, what's the point of having the police? Jin Wan's face was filled with a different kind of beauty. Her delicate brows were covered with a layer of frivolous mockery, and her voice was soft with a hint of coldness. Didn't this Jin Wan act as a little white flower in front of Mo Jingshan earlier? What was going on now? Relying on Mo Jingshan's support, she was starting to act again, wasn't she? Miss Han gritted her teeth and did not make a sound. Under her father's gaze, she had no choice but to maintain her apologetic attitude. Her face was red as she said, It's only a glass of red wine. There's no need to call the police, right? Miss Lin, who was squatting on the ground and refusing to take off her clothes, abruptly stood up. Her eyes were filled with anger as she said, Mo, I'm afraid you don't know how arrogant this Jin Wan is. Even if you don't help her, she can still stand on our heads. She's only pretending to be so kind and innocent because you're here. How could she be as delicate as you are right now? How disgusting. Jin Wan raised her brows. Even now, you're still insisting that I didn't give you any face? Didn't you hear Miss Han's apology earlier? I'm the one who was wrongly accused. Do I have to be soft when trying to prove my innocence? Miss Lin rolled her eyes at her and turned to look at Mo Jingshan. She did not believe that he would be tricked by Jin Wan's acting. After all, there were not many people who liked to see Jin Wan being so proud of herself. The few young ladies standing at the back saw that Miss Lin had taken the lead and directly agreed. That's true. I didn't expect Mrs. Mo to be so good at acting. Mo, the moment you arrived, she immediately dove into your embrace, looking so delicate. This change in mood is really shocking. This time, the hall once again filled with similar criticisms. The malicious intent from the few rich families' young ladies was so brazen. Many people wanted to see Jin Wan's truly despondent face, or her embarrassment when she was abandoned and ignored. Even if they were not tough enough in front of Mo Jingshan, She didn't believe that Jin Wan would be able to escape from so many people's accusations and doubts. Even if they couldn't skin her alive today, they had to make her a laughing stock. At this moment, Miss Han also took the opportunity to look at Mo Jingshan. Meeting the man's pitch-black eyes, her shrill voice trembled slightly and was even a little agitated. "Xiao Mo, regarding the matter of wrongly accusing Mrs. Mo, I've already apologized. But earlier on her ridicule toward me was indeed too much. I've always admired you, Xiao Mo. Before you got married, I even tried to find an opportunity to meet you. At that time, my emotions were unstable, so I committed suicide by jumping off a building. To me, this matter is already a very negative past. Yet, Mrs. Mo actually dared to tear open my scars and ridicule me in front of everyone. There's nothing wrong with liking someone. Besides, it was before CEO Mo got married. Shouldn't she apologize to me?" Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at her. "Should I applaud you for jumping off a building to commit suicide, or should I view every woman who has fallen for me in a different light? What does your negative past and extreme way of handling things have to do with me?" Miss Han's expression was stiff and pale. "I'm saying that earlier Mrs. Mo revealed my scars. I've already apologized to her, so she should also—" Mo Jingshan's tone was cold. "Do I look like someone who would uphold justice for someone unrelated to you? Or am I so free that I would seek justice for someone who wrongly accused my wife?" A woman who was unrelated to him was talking about her past to gain sympathy. Or perhaps, it could be said that she was trying to gain his attention. However, in Mo Jingshan's eyes, aside from Jin Wan, everything else here had nothing to do with him. Miss Han bit her lip, her hand holding onto the clothes she had just taken off. Facing the man she had liked for a long time, she lowered her head in grievance. She choked out, "But she—" However, Mo Jingshan no longer looked at her. He turned toward the group of people who were trying to bully Jin Wan. His gaze was calm and did not change in the slightest. "As my wife, it doesn't matter if you're delicate or independent. When a woman should be soft, she should be soft. When she should be firm, she should be neither servile nor overbearing." The man's tone remained mild, but it caused the sensible people in the crowd to immediately shut their mouths. The hall once again descended into a strange silence. Miss Han took a deep breath. It was as though she was unwilling and filled with hatred. Her gaze shifted back and forth between Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan. All of a sudden, someone softly spoke from the crowd, "Miss Han, are you still going to take off your clothes?" The silence was broken. The last bit of rationality and self-esteem that Miss Han had maintained on her face was instantly shattered. That person's words seemed to have activated some sort of mechanism. Many of the people who were originally waiting to see Jin Wan make a fool of herself now understood how they could protect themselves and prevent themselves from being implicated. People were often like this. Adding insult to injury was the greatest entertainment for these upper-class young ladies. No one cared about their moral bottom line. There had to be someone who could block this storm and protect everyone. At the same time, they had to appease the woman in Mo Jingshan's embrace. Perhaps they would be able to avoid a lot of trouble. Miss Han's eyes reddened. Her two hands gripped her clothes tightly, unwilling to continue taking them off. Seeing that Jin Wan was completely in Mo Jingshan's embrace, she was about to die from anger. She gritted her teeth and spoke toward Jin Wan. "The man you snatched from another woman is now protecting you in front of everyone. Mrs. Mo, you must be very proud, right?" Jin Wan calmly glanced at her. She did not understand what she meant by, "the man who snatched from another woman." Mo Jingshan's calm gaze caused Miss Han to feel as though she had been shoved into an ice cave. Her entire body was cold, but she was still angered to the point of madness. Furthermore, the crowd's ridicule toward her had provoked her to the point of losing her rationality. She suppressed the fear in her heart and loudly said, "Jin Wan, what's with that expression? Don't you know that Mo Jingshan was once engaged in America? He once had a fiancée." Miss Han had yet to finish her words when Feng Ling, who was standing in the middle of the bodyguards, abruptly kicked the back of her knee. She abruptly staggered and knelt onto the ground. "Why are you speaking so much nonsense when it's just taking off my clothes? Do you want me to help you?" Feng Ling coldly spoke. "You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."